Good evening and welcome to the good evening. That's much better, thank you. And welcome to the special meeting of the Board of Education. Mr. Rakestraw, can we have a roll call to establish quorum, please?
Yes. On the roll call to establish quorum, Student Director Simmons, Student Director Smith, Director Lotta,
Present.
Director Williams,
Present, sir.
Director Hutchinson, Director Barry,
Present.
Director Thompson, Vice President Batchelor,
Here.
and President Prohart.
Here.
Quorum present.
Thank you. And Mr. Hollis, can we have an interpretation check, please?
Yes, Madam President. For tonight's meeting, we have 3 languages available for live interpretation. They are Cantonese, Arabic, and Spanish. We also have a translation closed caption feature available on Zoom that you can use by clicking the closed caption feature on your Zoom taskbar. With that, we will start with live interpretation announcements. We will start with Cantonese. I will lower all attendees' hands on Zoom. Please only raise your hand if you need the language being announced, which at this time is Cantonese. And I will ask Ms. Ho if she can come off and mute and do the interpretation announcement for Cantonese.
各位奧倫社區人士好，呢一度係奧倫聯合校區教育委員會特別會議。假如而家你身處現場，你可以去禮堂嘅後方領取一本平板嘅電腦，然後聯同我哋嘅網上聽眾一齊收聽我哋嘅廣東話翻譯。假如你需要廣東話翻譯，請你喺熒屏嘅右下方點擊一個地球形狀嘅符號，然後選擇廣東話，咁你就會收聽到我哋嘅廣東話翻譯。假如你需要廣東話翻譯，請你喺熒屏上邊舉手俾我哋知道。多謝。The Cantonese announcement is done, Mr. Hollis.
Thank you, Ms. Ho. Checking the attendees on Zoom to see if there's any hands raised for Cantonese interpretation. Seeing no hands raised, we will not start with Cantonese interpretation at this time. Moving forward to Arabic. I will lower all attendees' hands on Zoom. Please only raise your hand if you need the language being announced at this time, which is Arabic. And I will ask Ms. Abdi if she can come off and mute and give the interpretation announcement for Arabic.
السلام عليكم ورحمة الله وبركاته. مساء الخير جميعا. نقدم لكم الترجمة باللغة العربية. الرجاء اتباع التعليمات والإرشادات التالية. في أسفل الشاشة ابحث عن الدائرة على شكل الكرة الأرضية، اضغط عليها ثم اختار كلمة الترجمة واختار اللغة العربية. أما إذا تستخدمون الأجهزة الذكية هناك 3 نقاط في أسفل الشاشة عند كلمة مور، اضغطوا عليها ثم على كلمة الترجمة واختار اللغة العربية. رجاء كتم الصوت الأصلي حتى تستمعون إلينا بوضوح وشكرا. Arabic instruction is done.
Thank you, Ms. Abdi. Checking the attendees to see if there's any hands raised for Arabic interpretation. Seeing no hands raised, we will not start with Arabic interpretation at this time. Moving forward to Spanish. I will lower all attendees' hands on Zoom. Please only raise your hand if you need the language being announced, which at this time is Spanish. And I will ask Mr. Copenhagen if he can come off and mute and give the interpretation announcement for Spanish.
La reunión cuenta con el servicio de interpretación simultánea al español. Les pedimos que por favor levanten la mano virtual en este momento si necesitan el servicio de interpretación. Si no levantan la mano en este momento, no se prestará el servicio durante la primera parte de la agenda. Por favor, levanten la mano virtual o escriban en la caja de comentarios que necesitan el servicio. Muchas gracias. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Copenhagen. Checking the attendees on Zoom to see if there's any hands raised for Spanish interpretation. Seeing no hands raised, we will not start with any interpretation at this time. That concludes this interpretation announcement, and I will pass it back to Madam President.
Thank you. I want to welcome everyone to the January 20th special meeting of the Oakland Unified School District Board of Education to address the district's budget. Tonight, we will hear from Superintendent Sadler and from financial experts at HYA who have been analyzing our budget, our financial practices, and will present a roadmap for future actions. Before we hear from our presenters, I want to take us back a minute to where we were on October 8th. At that time, many believed a state loan was inevitable to address what was projected as a $100 million deficit. The board, however, was committed to supporting a qualified certification because we believed the district had sufficient cash flow to avoid a loan and to avoid returning to state receivership. For that decision, the board faced criticisms and warnings of financial insolvency. As board members engaged with labor partners, families, staff, students, principals, educators, school finance experts, and board leaders from other districts, we saw a different path, a different way to approach budget development that centers students and protects the staff who work most closely with them. Through those conversations, it became clear that estimates of the deficit varied widely, and we needed clarity, and that we needed to restructure our central administrative staff seriously. Scenario 3, which is where we are today, was never meant to be a final plan. It was a directive. And the board directed the superintendent to prioritize cuts away from classrooms, to significantly reduce central office administration, and to closely examine contracts and outsourcing, and to bring back to the board a budget that reflected this. As part of her due diligence, Superintendent Sadler hired outside financial experts to provide an accurate and independent analysis of the district's finances so we could understand the true size of the deficit and develop a sustainable, student-centered budget. The board made the right decisions. We voted for a qualified certification of the first interim, and the county agreed with the board. We do not have a cash flow problem. We can maintain our required 3% reserve, even though we were told at the first interim that we would dip below the state required 2%. And we now know the deficit is closer to 50 million, not 100 million. When the board took action, the estimate was 100 million. However, after working with the team, the finance team, and the consultants, the estimate is now closer to 50 million. But there is still a lot of work to be done. These are significant wins for our students and our staff. And at the same time, we know that a $50 million deficit remains and that difficult decisions are still ahead. As we move forward, every budget adjustment must be examined through one central question. How does this decision impact students and student learning? This is the hard decision before us. We've been told many times that the board cannot make hard decisions to make budget cuts or to close schools or to have a solvent budget. And I want to reassure our staff and community that school closures and mergers are not on the table. Working with the superintendent and the finance team led by Ryan Nguyen, financial experts, labor partners, principals and educators, families in the community, we will work together to develop a sustainable budget that meets the needs of our students. Tonight's presentation will give the board, staff, families, and community a stronger foundation for understanding where we are financially and how future budget decisions will be made. HYA will present its roadmap, and board members and the community will have the opportunity to ask questions of both HYA and the senior leadership team, who are all present tonight. Looking ahead, the next budget discussion will take place at the January 28th regular board meeting, when the proposed implementation plan for Scenario 3 will be presented. There will be ample time for board and public discussion and community engagement following that meeting. A final vote is scheduled for February 11th. This is a difficult conversation tonight, and we recognize the real fears in the room about job security, program reductions, and staffing impacts. I ask that we engage respectfully, refrain from personal comments, and approach this conversation with a problem-solving mindset, focused on ideas and solutions rather than on individuals. At this point, I want to turn it over to Superintendent, and again, thank her for her bold actions in we're doing our budget work.
Thank you, President Brohard. Good evening, everyone. Good evening, President Brohard, Vice President Batchelor, members of the board, and members of the community here in the audience and online. As we gather the day after Dr. King's holiday, and I'm reminded of his words, "It is a crime for the nation to fail to educate its children." I think that quote is very significant as we have these discussions. The fiscal work we do tonight, difficult as it is, ensures Oakland Unified can continue educating children, not just this year, but for years to come. I want to thank all of you for being here for this critical work session. This is the time for us to think about where we're going and how we're getting there. Now, the framing for tonight's purpose, I want to talk about what that is and what that is not. Tonight is not an announcement of school closures or mergers. Our recommendations will not include closures or mergers. What tonight is, a work session to understand the district's finances and options to implement fiscal adjustments under Scenario 3. What it is a transparent look at our actual fiscal position based on rigorous analysis with external validation. What it is an opportunity to hear from the board and the public to obtain guidance before the staff finalizes our recommendations on January 28th for board action. Now, why tonight matters? Tonight matters because you all need independent expert confirmation that our internal analysis is sound, that our projections are accurate, and our path forward is grounded in best practices from across California. That's why we brought in HYA. Now I want to talk about the progress we've made together, and there has been significant work done by staff. With the adoption of Scenario 3, we were authorized up to $103 million in budget adjustments. You showed leadership, board members. You showed leadership when others might have delayed this process. You gave clear direction, you protected students, and you focused on operating with fiscal discipline, and you supported us doing this work with care and transparency. Now, here's what we've delivered on that mandate. The first thing we did, which was in our Scenario 3, was institute a spending freeze that worked. And I want to thank our schools. Our schools absorbed 10% cuts to unencumbered funds, and central office took 20%. We've restored 2% of the reserve. And we're working towards 3%, which is the board's mandate. But every step we take, we want to justify every dime in terms of what we're doing, and this is why we're doing this detailed work. This month, I convened a meeting with County Superintendent Elise Castro and our fiscal advisors, who you will meet later on. And as a result, I am pleased to report that the county, while meeting at my office with our fiscal advisors and Ryan, we were able to move from the perception of a negative certification to qualified. That was the action that this board took, and I'm really excited about that movement. Now, that came because she expressed confidence after finding out the work that we were doing together as a team. And by the way, my team is out in front here, the SLT that did that work, along with myself and our fiscal advisors. And it was the willingness that she had and the confidence in our team, which was led by Ryan Wynn, and she could see our willingness to do the work together as we move to strengthen our operations. Again, this is the progress we've made together. The next thing that we were able to do, and as our president mentioned today, the deficit, which was once projected at over $100 million, now stands at approximately $50 million, and we haven't completed our work. But it took looking at a lot of details and a lot of time, a lot of mornings and a lot of evenings and weekends to get there. We've maximized restricted funding, as was discussed earlier. We've corrected expenditure coding and implemented best practices from districts across California to more accurately reflect the district's financial position. I also want to say, and I've just mentioned this earlier, our senior leadership team truly stepped up, and I am so proud of them. I feel absolutely supported by the quality of their work, their willingness to focus in a way of integrity to deliver on the board's vision. And at this juncture, I want to express how I see our next steps, and it's about the honest truth. I'm committed to be your honest broker. So here it is. Good progress is not problem solved, but $50 million deficit still means people we care about will be without work, and programs for children that children love and that parents love will look different or be eliminated. But that's something that we have to think about and face as we shore up our district and as we focus. And as we face these additional realities, we are dealing with several things: expiring grants, expiring parcel taxes, and we still have outstanding labor negotiations to consider. But here's the fundamental math. Enrollment, while improving, and you heard me talk about that last week, will not return to the 55,000 students that were here when I first started in the district. Revenues are flat, and costs here, as they are everywhere, continue to increase. This means we must address the structural deficit. That's real. At the same time, I'm extremely hopeful. As I look at the work that we've done together as a community, as a board, as working with our parents and working with our staff, I am pleased to share this evening a presentation that will be provided by HYA, Hazard Young, Atiyah and Associates, HYA. HYA is one of the nation's oldest and largest education consulting firms, which was established in 1987. They've successfully supported more than 1,950 school systems across the country. Their deep expertise in supporting districts during periods of fiscal constraint and organizational transition is exactly what Oakland Unified needs as we implement Scenario 3. Why HYA? Because you deserve external validation, because our community deserves confidence that we're not just making difficult decisions, we're making the right decisions based on expert analysis and proven fiscal recovery strategies. Our HY team includes managing partner Makai Ali, who oversees the engagement, and our lead advisors are LaTanya Kirk-Carter and Dr. Ruben Fructos. Dr. LaTanya Kirk-Carter is a veteran school business executive with extensive experience leading fiscally distressed urban school districts through financial instability and state oversight. She served as interim state administrator for Inglewood Unified during state receivership and has led financial turnarounds at multiple California districts. She's recognized statewide for rebuilding financial systems and correcting structural deficits. Presenting tonight on behalf of the team is Dr. Ruben Fructos. Dr. Fructos brings more than 30 years of California school finance experience, including leading fiscal stabilization at Sweetwater Union High School District during a period of significant deficit. He's known for his calm, steady leadership, his ability to quickly diagnose underlying fiscal issues, and his skill in guiding districts through complex budget corrections while maintaining trust with labor partners and governing boards. I have absolute confidence in HYA's expertise and the analysis you'll hear tonight. Their findings will help us chart the path from where we are to where we need to be. Now, I'm pleased to acknowledge, and I really wanted to take this time to acknowledge my leadership team. I'd like each leader to stand as I introduce them, because it's significant to acknowledge their ongoing work in service of students and families. And I'd like to start with Preston Thomas, who's the Chief of Schools and Student Outcomes. Curtis Sariki, Chief Partnership Officer. Ryan Nguyen, our Chief Financial Officer. Tara Gard, our Chief Technology Officer. Dr. V. Lynette McElhaney, Chief of Staff. Janine Lindsay, who is on the dais here, our General Counsel. And Dr. Sandra Aguilera, who I know just had to take a phone call, our Chief Academic Officer. And I'd like to give them my applause for their ongoing work. Thank you. Thank you, and you may be seated. This is your team, my team. These are people working day and night with care for our schools, care for our students and families, and care for this board as you navigate these difficult choices. Following tonight's presentation, each of you will receive private briefings, 2x2s, board members, to discuss detailed guidance on the priorities and values that should shape our recommendations. On January 28th, we return with recommendations for board action shaped by your input, grounded in HYA's analysis. And we commit to continued community engagement, transparent forums where families, staff, and partners can examine the data together. In fact, tomorrow I will be meeting with our students around their issues and priorities as we have these discussions. To our community members here tonight, I want to thank all of you who are in attendance and who are watching. Your presence matters. This is your district. Now, in closing, I want you to know we are here to stand with all of you, the community, the board, the staff, our students, as we implement your vision going forward. The district that I love, my home, I want you to know that we do this with competence, transparency, and unwavering focus on Oakland's children. And my staff knows that I talk about it every day. I see the children of Oakland as I do this work. I want to thank everybody. This work is hard, but it's not impossible. It's a worthy fight because our kids are worth it. Thank you very much. And now I'd like to pass it on to Dr. Frutos, who will be making his remarks. Thank you very much. I just saw Dr. Sandra Aguilera come in. I know she had to take a phone call, but I do want to acknowledge her because she spent day and night working on those first pagers and has continued to do the work on a daily basis. Thank you, Dr.
Good evening, Board President, Board Directors, and community of Oakland Unified. I'm Ruben Frutos, and I'll be taking you through a process that we've been working at earnest for, it now seems like more than the time of a couple of weeks, but I think you'll be pleased with the results of the presentation. The presentation has two components. One is a clear explanation of the work that we need to do, and also some of the outcomes that we have been able to achieve in working with your school team. The commitment from our agency is to achieve stability in the fiscal components of your budget and to maintain solvency over time. To assist the district in doing that, we need to work not only in the current year, but ahead for at least 3 years, and also historically, to see the patterns that the district has had. That's very important sometimes, and we forget how important the past is. And I'll give you an example. COVID, a lot of funding came, and that now has evolved into a new condition. A lot of districts have uncertainty because of enrollment and attendance. We're going to discuss that too. And our goal is to help the district, because ultimately you live here, this is your community, have a stable budget for 26, 27, and beyond. In order to achieve that, we've identified a variety of needs. So this presentation will have two components as we go slide by slide. One, you'll see needs and areas of interest, and then you'll see actions. And the actions is what our team will be working with your team to accomplish. So one of the most important things is a full review of budgets, and that's what we've been working on. We want to make sure that there's integrity in the budgets, and already there are elements that we're reviewing that provide opportunities, especially for future years. We need to make sure that your budget has flexibility. You'll hear us talk a lot now and in the future about the difference of using unrestricted funding versus restricted funding for the various programs that you have. It is important for us to think of multi-year projections, not only because they're approved that way, but because it is in your best interest to have programs that can be sustained. As we celebrate the district's accomplishment with first interim, and believe me, going from negative to qualified is something that's good. We also need to think of second interim, which is coming soon, and then the budgetary process for the following year. As your superintendent and board president said, there will be a need to do restructuring in the budgetary process. That is very important because the only way to have a budget that's sustained is to look at areas and opportunities. There will be more information on an enrollment analysis and the future for your attendance. We obviously will work with areas such as economic uncertainty and balances, and then look at staffing in a way that will be able to accomplish the programs that you want. To that end, we started working with Dr. Sadler and her team at Earnest on January 7th and met in person with the team on January 12 and 13 to develop a budgetary review. This process yielded a significant cost reduction to the unrestricted portion of the general fund, which is our area of focus, and also areas in the restricted portion that we believe require our immediate attention. I will cover more on this process in a subsequent slide, but suffices to say that the original budgetary indicated challenges have been significantly reduced to approximately $50 million. And I wanted to pause for a second and let the board know how impressed we as a team of finance people are about your actions. My background includes work with the Department of Education in San Diego and then with a variety of districts. And it is very uncommon to come into a district, both as a CBO, a deputy, or a superintendent, where the board already has taken action. And your action to move the district to scenario 3 and the variety of reductions and modifications to the budget that you already agreed to do, that's part of our work. I mean, you already did some of the more difficult things. Our job is to now come back and say, there are some opportunities that might not necessitate some of those cuts, might be variations. But I applaud the courage that the board showed in implementing something like that and approving it. So as I mentioned to you, we are identifying needs and also offering what we believe will be not only short-term plans, and to me, short-term plans mean the current year, 25, 26, but long-term planning for 26, 27, and beyond. So for example, I mentioned to you that we have areas of interest in our actions. We need to look at realistic revenue forecasting. The budgetary basis for our budgets is not enrollment. We get paid in attendance. And we need to look at attendance that is actually realized. As the board knows, we get paid on what happens in P2. That means we look at the entire year and make sure that we have the students that will facilitate the funding. Do you get feedback, or is it just me? Yeah, okay. Hopefully that's a little better.
They might be trying to fix it on the back
Okay.
end too. Thank you.
So the other piece is fiscal transparency. We need to make sure that we do periodic budget reports. And communicating with your superintendent, one of the recommendations that we will be making is that there are regular budgets on a monthly basis or as regularly as possible to bring to you all the necessary information so that when decision-making happens, you are not just simply looking at the quarterly reports or interims, but at regular reports that will produce information that is important to you. Now, we'll talk a lot about enrollment and attendance, but that's not just an Oakland problem. Enrollment and attendance issues happen throughout the state. It is important that we manage it in a way that it continues to protect our programs. The declines that we've had, whether they're 7,000 students or what have you, have the ability to create a structural imbalance in our budget, and that's something that we need to address. So now we jump into some numbers. This is a chart that I'm sure you've seen before, and it's a historical perspective that gives us a small indication of the conditions that we have in our district. In 22-23, we had a very good budgetary year. Our expenditures were lower, our revenues were higher. A lot of it, as you remember, was one-time funding. As we went into the subsequent year, it began to align because our expenditures were continuing in an upward tick, but our revenues declined. Once we went to 23-24, once again, our revenues were a little higher, but if you notice, the expenditures have an interesting thing happening. It's just a continuous curve up. And if you look at your revenues, they go up and down. That creates a situation where we need to look at the future and how we're going to balance the budget, understanding that our revenues are decreasing. And it could be because of enrollment, it could be because of...
We're
Yes,
going
of
to
course.
pause again and fix the microphone so everyone can hear you.
Can you hear me better now? Okay, hopefully no feedback. So in a nutshell, one of the important things that we will bring to the board and your financial team will bring regularly is information as to how the year is shaping based on your attendance and how the year is shaping based on the actual revenues you receive and the expenditures that you're planning. That cannot just happen a few times a year. It's very important that it happens regularly and that you are informed for the decision-making that you are going to make. One of the reasons why we began to talk to your superintendent about the abilities and opportunities within your budgets is that you have several areas where there are funds that have been in what we call the restricted part of the budget. These are funds that are either grants or unspent category funding, and they have the ability to help the unrestricted portion of the budget by shifting some of the cost in a way that's legal. So we always want to make sure that we verify the granting opportunities, and that frees some of the unrestricted funding, and we'll talk more about that. There are also areas like supplementary and concentration that present similar opportunities. The other piece is to tighten expenditure controls. One of the areas in the budget that are important for us to bring to the district, and your financial team has been working on, is to freeze non-essential spending and limit one-time solutions that can obscure fiscal health. So if we find one-time money, that's fantastic for the current year, but we should not believe that that solution will help you in subsequent years. So we will always be very clear in what's one-time money, what's ongoing money, what helps you today, what can help you tomorrow. Contracts and services are important because sometimes with the best of intentions, a contract is enabled in the current year, let's say second semester, and the funding is beginning to pay. And that contract could have been enabled a subsequent year. So another area that we're going to talk a lot about in our circles, people like Ryan in your office calls them the 5,000s. It's a category where we will be looking at some of the things that have been done before and what are opportunities for us. And our recommendations sometimes will have serious consequences. A spending freeze is a serious consequence. So the board has taken serious actions. And by no means I want to tell you while I'm up here that your situation is not serious. It's very serious. So we want to make sure that we protect programs, that we protect schools, that we protect the compensation that our employees have, but that we also look at every opportunity to make sure that when we finish the year, the general fund is in a position where it can pass all the audits and all the revisions that are done by the county. To rebalance your budgets from a structural perspective, one of the realities is that as you looked at the line chart that I showed you before, we've been spending more money than we receive, and the balances that we have are there to help us, but in the long run, that structural imbalance needs to be addressed. One of the examples that I always give regarding the work that we do is that a budget is a budget is a budget. Some have more zeros. The one at your home might have less, maybe not. And we balance them the same way. It's your revenues, your expenditures, and you use your balance to carry you through the year. When we come to you and begin to discuss structural imbalances as we build the budgets for 26, 27, and beyond, that's where your scenario 3 will really be very important because you already initiated the discussions about modifications to the budgeting sequence that you've done to manage and support your programs. So more to come as we look at what the board's priorities are and the funding that we actually have. The district, like most districts in California in large urban areas, my last few districts were that way before I retired, we're in built-out communities, areas that have flourished, that have all the areas around the community with not a significant amount of open land for development. So in some districts, you have significant growth. It makes budgetary decisions a lot easier because you have all these opportunities. In districts that are more mature, the decisions are a little more difficult because you have a set amount of funds, you need to accomplish a variety of programs, but you know that the growth in the district has to be either programmatic as you attract or, families or new students. So one of the charts that we're going to look at later is your enrollment, and you'll see what I'm talking about when we go into that area. But first, This is a snapshot of your budgets for several years. And if you can indulge me, it's a simple picture that tells a story. The lowest line is the 22-23 unrestricted portion of the budget. And if you look at the third up, and then the fifth up, and then the seventh up, those are all unrestricted. If you notice, they have a huge blue line. That is basically your local control funding sources. Think a big amount of money coming from the state. What was curious to me, as we saw in the other chart, is that if you notice, it goes up and down. It's 1 year more, 1 year less. And that's interesting because we need to discuss how do you forecast on that condition. If it was always going up, my job would be very easy. If it was always going down, our job would be very difficult but predictable. That is something that we need to discuss. Now go to the second line, and the fourth, and the sixth, etc. Those are your restricted components. And guess what? They're going down every year. Now you might say, well, we got a lot of one-time money a few years ago, if you remember ESSER funds and all that, but it continues to decline. So as we review our budgets, and this is simply one picture, there are going to be a lot of components that we're going to be coming to you, the board, and say, this is why we have this opinion regarding a program, or this is why we have an opinion regarding a revenue stream. Because sometimes it is important for you to see actually the components of a budget to see what is happening. The other piece is workforce realignment. One of the most difficult things, and I was just mentioning that to your chief talent officers we were coming here, is that one of the most difficult things is how do we work with people? The largest component of every school district's budget is our workforce, the folks that come to do the work, the folks that provide programs, that serve our kids, etc. And one of my primary goals in any budget development is to protect the district's plans and how we will support that workforce. There are, however, staffing levels that need to be realigned, as your superintendent mentioned. And part of our goal is to work with the team to make sure that we bring as much funding as possible so that you have what you need for the programs that you have. I'm not a huge advocate on having large funds in one category while the district is struggling to maintain a program that's desirable. So part of the conversation, and it is a very serious conversation that we're going to have, is why do we have money here when you need it here? Keep that in mind because it sounds simple, but it is complicated, and those are discussions that we will bring to your attention. At the same time, we have to comply with state and federal law in all these categories. Maximizing existing funding is heavily tied to ADA. And one of the first areas when I first heard that I was going to be invited to come and work with your district, any finance person looks at your enrollment, looks at your budgets, at your funding. But one thing that caught my eye was that your enrollment, still large, has a component of attendance, and the differential is significant, which means you have a good amount of enrolled students, but the attendance sometimes falls a little bit below that 90%. And it's an area that we need to discuss because, as I mentioned in the very first couple of slides, the district gets funded based on attendance, not enrollment. But guess what? You and the team approve staffing at the beginning of the year based on enrollment because that's the number that we have, the number of students that have enrolled. So if you look at enrollment and then attendance, and we staff here and we get paid here, that differential is something that we need to discuss, and every effort needs to be made to maximize those students coming to school. The district has made great inroads. You have a variety of personnel that assist with attendance. My view, based on what you've done, is that that work is very important to make sure that attendance is maximized. And we want to make sure, again, that we realize the use of all our funding in a way that benefits your programs. So our job is to assist in the development of improvement plans for school performance, to continue to work with you on community support to make sure that our attendance is as high as possible, and to train your finance teams in the use of the most restricted funding. When we talk with governance teams, sometimes one of the first things they ask is, based on what we're doing here, what are some bullet points? What is something that I can tell our constituents that not only will resonate, but it sounds realistic in our budget, in our district, that will help us? And the one snippet that I can give you is that Oakland needs to start using their most restricted dollars first. And if that's a message that we can agree to today, that's a very important element that, based on my initial reviews of your budgets, that's not something that has always happened. So I mentioned to you that we wanted to look at attendance. If you look at attendance from a perspective of how we staff, for example, one grouping that's important is your K3 or TK3 nowadays, if you have those classes, and I know we have them, then 4, 6, 7, 8, 9, 12. And the reason is that the staffing at the elementary is different than the period by period staffing at secondary. So if you look at this chart, you see that in years like 2021, 21, 22, the blue bar, we lost a lot of students. Then the following year, we recovered. And then it's been up and down. But the one area of hope that I saw, and I actually saw that you have had news about this, is that purple column where your early grades in our district, TK3, is higher. And to me, that's a good set of data, because those students will stay with the district for many years. So as we look at growth, if the growth materializes in second semester as attendance, the growth that you seem to have at the lower grades is very good news. Now, conversely, we want to make sure that we look at why are we having losses at the secondary level. Is it attrition? Is it folks leaving for whatever reason? So all these things are important to the budget, because you, the governance team, need to know this is what's happening to your student population over time. Are we retaining or are we not retaining? Another element that's important is to look at how our parcel taxes, how our grants, and how that works in relation to the board's direction and the superintendent's tasks on budgeting. So one of our goals is to look at feasibility studies. As I was talking to your facilities team, and as I was looking at opportunities, I know that you've done a good job with issuances. And Preston and I already started talking about what are future things. One of the things that I did in most of my districts was pass bonds, community redevelopment. Back in the day, we were doing Mello-Roosas, et cetera. Those opportunities have to be in conjunction with your goals and objectives, because many times there are a variety of opportunities to the funding that not only serve the district, but also can help with some of the areas of concern that you might have, like, for example, the status of your schools, the maintenance, how they look, the capacity, etc. So our goal is to work with your team in some of those strategies. We have, again, good news in having reached qualified certification. However, as the county reviewed your budgets and told the superintendent this good news, they have their financial team shared that there are still concerns. Remember, I told you this is a very serious budget. We celebrate the qualified, but we know that we need to maintain it for second interim and then continue to improve for the budgetary process. So it's important that we continue to strengthen the communication to you and to strengthen our partnership with the county to make sure that if we work together, I told the superintendent, if they know what we're doing in advance and they know that they're going to approve it, it's a lot easier to go to somebody that's already seen your data if they're the approving entity. So one of the goals is to continue what your superintendent is already doing, which is increase communications with our regulatory agencies. And one of the elements that are important to our team is the idea of working in training and support for finance basics. In one of the meetings that we had, there was conversation about how school budgets work, and they are complicated. But at the end, we need to convey them in such a way that they make sense to you and that they make sense to our community. That's why you see me sometimes present a very simple chart that is, in reality, a lot of complicated information behind it. And that doesn't mean that we don't bring the detail. The detail is very important. But it is very important that we work with your you, the governance team, and your leadership to bring information not just regularly, that's why I was mentioning those monthly reports, but also in a way that executives can make decisions and it is clearly understood whether it's good or bad information. To me, that's very important, and it helps with the idea of getting to solvency, which is our primary goal. As I mentioned, we want to leverage the county's teams to help us with some of the work that we're doing, and we want to make sure that we eliminate any type of structural issue manipulations in the budget, and I'll explain what it is. At the beginning of my presentation, I was mentioning to you that we need to be clear that one-time money is one-time money and ongoing money is ongoing money. One-time money cannot solve your structural program. It buys us time sometimes, it allows us to make great decisions, but ultimately, your budget needs to live for many years in a solvent situation. That is a conversation that we're gonna continue to have because there are contingencies if we rely only on a balance to try to patch a budget for years to come. There are three elements that are very important to us to make sure that we have a 3-year balanced budget. That's not only mandated, but it's something that we have to bring to your attention because very few decisions that you make are just for 1 year. They have to be long-term. So we need to demonstrate solvency over multiple enrollment and cost assumptions. That's why we looked at enrollment, and that's why we looked at your revenues and expenditures. We also need to develop key performance indicators. Our reserve levels, are they where they need to be? That's why I talked about restricted versus unrestricted reserves. Our expense ratios, are we spending too much in a particular area that's actually negatively impacting your programs? It is very important that we have that conversation. That's sometimes when the board needs to make decisions with your superintendent to guide the team to say you need to look at how this needs to change. And then look at your stakeholder engagement strategy. One of the elements of my doctoral work was stakeholders in finance. A lot of people think finance is just numbers, but any budgetary report tells you a story of how you've been and how you will be. And if we're not mindful, you are stakeholders, the employees are stakeholders, your students are stakeholders, your parent community, partners, how they all fit in the budgetary process, then we're not really looking at a complete process. So it's very important that we provide guidance regarding all these different scenarios and that we develop a roadmap for budget development. Now we're going to get to a couple of slides that actually talk about timelines. Up to December of this past year, the district did a variety of strategies to make sure that we got to where we are today. And I'll list some that are mandatory, some that I know that the district has done. You, the board, authorized a recovery process. We have been working on what are good cash flows and now multi-year projections. We are reviewing staffing and enrollment. We are looking at costs to make sure, like I told you, that there are budgets that we might need to freeze if there's unspent funds. We are looking at the goal of stabilizing the budget. We are looking at scenario 3 with a little bit of a nuance now. Scenario 3 was a very powerful solution that the board adopted. But now that we know that we have some other areas that can help, it allows us to come to you with some modifications to scenario 3 that might reduce the original impact that you envisioned. We need to look at dollar reduction targets. There are categories where we might be spending and we need to come to you and say, you just don't have the dollars for this or that. We need to look at options beyond the ones that were in originally scenario 3, because again, there are areas in the budget that have opportunities. So we need to look at the financial condition. We need to make sure that there's a structural balance in the process. In January, now, the board has authorized and reaffirmed scenario 3, and we are going to bring updated options. And we are drafting a fiscal and solvency plan that not just helps the board make decisions, but ultimately will help us develop the second interim that needs to be approved by the county. In February, we need to come to you with a lot of verifications. We need to have updated cash flows, updated multi-year projections. We need to do any type of personnel decisions that need to be made, and confirmed savings are executable. Remember, I mentioned to you that it's one thing to converse and say, we think we found $10 million here, the board needs to be asking, show us exactly where that is, and that's what your superintendent has also demanded. Let's look exactly at the categories. I don't think your superintendent was exaggerating what you said. We met a lot. I think two people should not know each other that well in a span of a week and a half or so. But your team has been very welcoming, and part of the team very, very quickly. Come February, in March, one of the important elements is you need to start thinking in a term that's difficult, and that is it's irreversible. Once the March 15 notices are out, whatever is needed, one, your staffing is revised, and one, the second interim is sent to the county, we're literally at a point of no return. Is that serious? Because there's only so many opportunities that we have as we begin to prepare the budgets for the subsequent year. So that's the moment where the conversation needs to be, have we reversed insolvency? And you need to be asking that question as our governance team. We will be showing you a variety of information up to that point, but by that point, by the time second interim is reviewed and my hope is approved, you need to know that the opportunities and the flexibility after that is very limited. Then when we come to April, we need to finalize a lot of things in anticipation of the budgetary process for the subsequent year. We need to approve and finalize all our departmentals and site budgets. We need to implement any type of impact bargaining. You have what appears to be a strong bargaining team, and I know your labor associations are very strong. That communication needs to happen, and we need to make sure that all impacts are finalized. And in May, as you know, that's when the public hearing takes place. But that time, all the work that we've been doing needs to translate into a budget that will go before the public. And they can comment, they can ask, we need to be able to answer, and you need to know they kept us informed. We know exactly where we are, what the challenges are, and because it's a structural balance over time, there will be challenges, and also what we were able to accomplish to make sure that that budget is approved. And in June, you, the board, adopt the budget for 26-27, as well as the mandated multi-year projections, and the budgets get certified. So that's a sequence that includes some mandates and some things that I believe are in alignment with what the board already has done. And that's identify that you are in a place where you need to make some structural changes to your budgetary process. And here are some of the numbers that we've been able to accomplish recently, and then some of the structural check marks, as I call them, that you need to know we are looking at. Let me start with the check marks for financial restructuring. We need to make sure this is ongoing. It cannot be a one-stop solution. We did something today, we're good forever. That's not the way our work is, and I know you know that this is something that's ongoing. We need to have conservative revenue assumptions. Why? Because you know that it's based on attendance, not in enrollment, and that discrepancy is a challenge that we cannot sustain. We need to make sure that we're clear. Cash solvency needs to be maintained throughout the year. The district has done actually a very good job with your cash flow projections. We need to make sure that continues. The staffing needs to be aligned to enrollment. I asked the superintendent if your district has a practice of that extensive review at the beginning of the year, and you do. So we need to make sure that we work with that. The board authorized actions that we discussed in the timeline by March. The reserve restoration incorporated into the multi-year plan. It is very, very important that you think of your general fund, especially the unrestricted part, as vulnerable. And the more we restore it, the more you will be able to sustain subsequent years' impacts to your budget. We need to avoid one-time solutions, except this year, because we have one-time money that we're looking at implementing. But in the long run, solutions need to be long-lasting for your budget. We need to regularly monitor and report to the county office. So your scenario 3 identified $100 million in budget reductions and thus a negative certification. And one of the questions that somebody might ask you is, that's what was in the news. Is it not real? What happened? And I can tell you something that I would say again in my quick 2-minute elevator trip. If I was your CBO when the budget was presented in the past, and I had seen the audit the way it is, there is a strong possibility that I would have come with similar numbers. Different CBOs make different decisions. A decision that's not questionable sometimes is to try to protect program, you get a loan. The repercussions are severe, though. I told you I work for the County Office of Education, and the repercussions of a loan are severe. Another solution, not good, not bad, but different, is to go to the budget process, and it's a lengthier and more difficult process, which is what we're opting to do. But that requires a lot of reductions, it requires a lot of shifts, and at the end, hopefully, the county will do what they did, work with us to certify us as qualified. So you might get that question asked, was the 100 million not real, was it real, what have you? Well, there are a variety of interpretations. The reality is that you still have a structural balance that needs to be addressed. At this point, we believe it's somewhere around 50 million. So any community member, what they should know is that there's still work to be done, and quite frankly, whatever the number was before and whether we needed to close something or open something or shift something or borrow something, that's not where we are today. The directive of the board was qualified, the directive of the board was scenario 3, and I believe that is working today, and you need to continue it to make sure you achieve solvency in the long term. So we got a qualified first interim certification. What's next? With that $50 million in shifts and reductions, the primary drivers are the use of discretionary grants to reduce unrestricted costing. Remember I told you the word unrestricted is very important to us because that's the area of the budget where we have the biggest issues. Central unspent funds reductions, and what we did is there is a category in the school site budgets that are for supplies, materials, and services. That allows us not to touch people, but it was a reduction there too, which I believe is more tolerable. And then we have areas like carryovers and shifts to supplementary and concentration, 2 areas, for example, that we will come to you as alt-ed in small schools. Then there's deferred maintenance. Deferred maintenance is a very important element of any school district because you want your schools to be maintained. But there are times where the general fund cannot contribute as much, and that is something that we've been working on reducing from 3 million to about 1 million. And then, as I mentioned, the message of the day, emphasize the use of the most restricted funding first, which we will continue to bring to you as a message. What are the next steps? As I mentioned, second interim, reduction verification, and budget development. I cannot emphasize how much that scenario 3 remains in effect both under negative and qualified certifications. The work that you did doesn't really change. The only thing that changes is we don't have a negative certification. We don't need to look right now at borrowing or getting the county to do some type of overtake of our district. The emphasis is in protecting school sites, protecting programs, and the reduction needs to take into account significant budgetary restructuring, which is what we've been talking about. One of the important elements is to tell you what is our firm going to do in big steps. Obviously, our goal is to stabilize finances with your team to develop realistic budgets and transparent oversight. I cannot emphasize how important it is that we communicate to the superintendent every finding that you have in conjunction with your team so that that's communicated to you and your community. We need to align our spending to revenues by right-sizing our programs and by doing some structural changes. You already started doing that with scenario 3. We need to enhance our revenues ethically and sustainable. The best way to do it is to reduce that gap between enrollment and attendance. We need to strengthen you as the governance team through providing you real information constantly, and also our leadership and financial literacy by looking at every possible opportunity that our funding brings us and using the funds through those opportunities as long as it's acceptable to the grants, to the funds, and legal. And finally, our job is to serve as advisors and partners in any type of strategic planning that we need to do to make sure we are sustainable for multiple years. These strategies, hopefully position your district to protect your educational mission even while facing and resolving what we have, which are structural fiscal challenges. Thank you, and I'm happy to answer any questions you might have. Thank you.
Thank you. We're going to
And I
take,
didn't mean to be somber, it's just reality check.
we're going to take board questions first, and then we'll have ample time for public comment. I'm going to start with Director Hutchinson.
Thank you. I have to say unequivocally that I have found this presentation and what's going on to be extremely embarrassing, and I thought it was a very condescending tone.
Director Hutchinson, can you hold for 1 second? We can't hear you here, and we're trying to work out the sound. Director Hutchinson, can you talk so we can see if we can hear you?
Yeah, check 1, check 2, check 3.
Okay, we can hear you fine. Thank you. I want to start from the beginning.
Yeah, thank you. I wish we were actually starting from the beginning. That's one of the many problems. I find this to be extremely embarrassing. And, and I found the tone of that presentation and the opening remarks to be extremely condescending. It was just in this past June of 25, that after 22 years, OUSD left receivership, actually a year early after 22 years. And one of the key components to us leaving receivership was passing a fiscal systems audit, which had a number of outside parties sign off on the fact that OUSD, and under the leadership of Dr. Johnson Trammell and Lisa Grant Dawson as the CBO, had taken the steps to ensure that we knew how to manage our own finances moving forward. I was on the Budget and Finance Committee for 5 years, and I chaired that committee for the last 3 years. We know what our budget numbers are. I will put Lisa Grant Dawson up against any CBO in the state of California. And to hear at the start of this that magically now the deficit's only 50 million is inconceivable. And I'm gonna wait until I start throwing out the L word until later in my comments. The school board has not taken any actions this school year to address the financial crisis. When scenario 3 was passed, Superintendent Sadler clearly said over and over again that a scenario is not a plan, that scenario 3 was not a plan. And here we are, scenario 3 is being referred to as some kind of plan. And let's be clear, the only thing that was implemented out of scenario 3 was the superintendent and the board majority spending $400,000 to hire outside consultants from Southern California to fly into Oakland and tell us what we need to do. There was nothing in that report that was new information. We know all of that information as a school board and as a district, and all you have to do is watch any of the Budget and Finance Committee meetings from the last 3 years to get the exact same information. And why is this school board that's railed against consultants and outside contracts consistently now gone the route of spending extra money to bring in experts that we don't need? The certification of the first interim, it didn't magically all of a sudden now we're qualified. The school board voted against the recommendations of staff, which was the recommendation of the superintendent. And they were wrong to do it. But more than anything else, this reminds me of the bad old days before I was on the board and before Lisa Grant Dawson came here. We just heard a long, expensive presentation, but there's not been one number presented, not one document, not one link, not one attachment, not even an update of our current budget numbers. So for people to just sit here and say magically it doesn't exist, it ain't good enough, and this is not going to work. And anyone who is involved with this really needs to leave the district now. We can't afford the $400,000. And if this is the best that people can do, then they need to get out of the way and let us use the expertise that we have here to address the situation. Because again, there's nothing a consultant from Southern California who knows nothing about Oakland or our finances, there's nothing they can come in and tell us that we don't know.
Thank you,
And
Director
there's no
Hutchinson.
way,
That's your
excuse
time.
me, we were told at the start in the information that I got that we were going to have 5 minutes each. That was in the information that was sent out by the superintendent and by the chief of staff. So I don't know why that 5 minutes has now been changed to 3 minutes, because that's what we were informed
Thank you,
was going
Director
to happen
Hutchinson.
today. So I would like a clarification on that, because why were we sent information that each board member would have up to 5 minutes, and now that's not how we're operating on?
We'll have a second round if we
That
need it.
is the
Thank you.
email that I received from the
That's your time.
superintendent
Thank you.
and from the chief of staff. Well, when is it going to be everyone else's time?
Thank you.
And my last comment is, I could have made that report myself in 3 hours.
Thank
and
you.
it wouldn't have cost $400 an hour to get me to do it. Thank you.
Director Thompson.
Thank you, President Brohard. I hope I'm not reducing the grain size of what we're discussing, but I am kind of concerned as we look at a stable budget. I think I'm trying to use your vernacular now, stable budget for 2026 and 2027. But I am kind of concerned about the $15 million that we're deficit in 2025, 2026. In addition to that, or along with that, I'm kind of concerned about the March 15th letters. I mean, you alluded to that as you were speaking, because from my recollection as an administrator and also as a teacher, March 15th letters are very strategic, and they're utilized in order to make sure that you look at your budget and then you're able to forecast what you're going to be doing in the future. But I'm concerned that if we aren't looking at 2025, 2026, March 15th is going to approach too soon, and then all of us, our hands would be tied as a board, because of course you can't move forward if you haven't given adequate notice for March 15th letters. So I'm basically talking about that big picture that is really coming upon us really soon. We're living it right now, and so, and you're right, you know, doing an MYP, a multiple year projection is really important, but understanding your current circumstances are really important also. And like the previous speaker, I'm somewhat concerned about the movement from negative to qualified without sharing any numbers that showed how we got to that position.
I'll make two comments, Board Director Thompson, regarding your March 15 notices. The district has a practice that I think has been established, and we are not going to recommend any changes by any means, and it has to be strategic. You're absolutely right. You also have a variety of strategies that your talent office uses in order to be able to place personnel, to forecast with the schools and all that. None of that changes, and it shouldn't in the current year, because we need to make sure the staffing is done appropriately. That is very important. So I completely agree with you on that. Now, regarding multi-year projections, one of the most important things when you do a multi-year projection is not forget about your current year. That's why I even took you back in time to prior years. And it is important to see what has happened, because one of the areas of opportunity that you as a district have is probably because you did some conservative budgeting in prior years. You have areas where you have balances that can be used to benefit the area where you are struggling, which is the unrestricted portion of your budget. So I'm in agreement with you 100%. We need to look at the present year. We need to look at, in order to be able to build multi-year budgets. But I would add that we also need to look at the past and make sure that we understand why do we have the balances that we have. That to me is the most important thing. Part of the message that you have resonated similarly to what the board member that spoke online said. He said, well, can we see hard numbers? Well, you will, absolutely. We have no choice. You are going to be making decisions both 8 days from today, and you are going to have to make decisions for March 15. You are going to have to approve a second interim. So we have no choice but to bring information. But this first exercise that we did over the last few days was very important because it was necessary for us to first look at areas of opportunity before you start recommending cuts. You already were in a place where teams had said, we need to make $100 million in cuts. I saw your audit report, and I think in the present year, even the auditor mentioned $27 million as one of the potential impacts. So it doesn't matter if it's me or somebody else, you have to make reductions. The big question to me is, can we sustain this process of realigning the budget to get us through second interim report? And it also allows us to begin to build credibility in our budgets and also the ability to build better budgets for next year, for the subsequent year, et cetera. And because, as I indicated, personnel is our biggest driver. Your thoughts of March 15, staffing, making sure that we align are probably the most important element of what we're going to be doing. So your talent office is going to be very busy. That's my understanding. You're welcome. Thank you.
Yes, thank you, Dr. Frutos, and Dr. Cortez, and the whole team. I think it's very heartening to hear that all of the hard work is paying off and that the deficit, while still significant, is less than projected. I have a few questions, just being mindful of my time, just grouped by theme to sort of help clarify our path towards stability. I think the first is on slide 6, you mentioned this pattern of our initial budget and then initial budgeted revenues and actual budgeted revenues being significantly different, and sometimes the variance is in the neighborhood of $100 million. I think I have a question about how we make those projections have less variance, and then how we, the second thing is, I think, Dr. Sadler, you mentioned about our reserve for economic uncertainty being restored. I think it would be helpful to clarify for the public how we found those dollars, and again, I think that was shared with the county, but I think some detail would be great. The second is just supporting growth and equity. I do see moving our, for example, alt ed and small schools into S&C supplemental and concentration funding to support those communities is, I think, a great move for equity, since those schools tend to have a much higher concentration of need than other schools. I do want to be clear how we're ensuring those resources are maximized to improve outcomes for our highest need students, as opposed to just being a budgetary shift. And so I think that is, a question maybe in other districts you've worked with. I can repeat these, sorry. And then I think I'll try to, just the last one I'll say is around transparency and accountability. I think you mentioned that a lot of times. We've all talked about that. As we verify these reductions for second interim in March, I'm just wondering how we can present, and maybe I'm saying we need to present that data to the public in a way that highlights the successes that we've had closing this deficit and meeting our solvency targets, being clear about what are the key milestones we need to move from qualified to positive certification by the end of the year. And then I think developing some kind of, I think the audit committee has a tracker for different audit findings. Maybe it's like we could make a fiscal health dashboard for the community to see tangible proof kind of in more routinely, updated more regularly, that we're becoming more sustainable.
Let me first start with your first question, which was how do we achieve less of a differential between a budget and actual, like has happened in some years. I wish there was a simple answer. The work of budget teams would be a lot simpler. There are several components that we have to bring to your attention as we build a budget. The number one component that always will be the biggest driver of our revenues is what is the potential enrollment. So one of the things we're going to do as we work this year is work with your team to see how are our enrollment projections done. Remember, I mentioned to you it's important to know enrollment because staffing will come with those numbers, but I also want the board to know when we did an enrollment projection, how was our final attendance? Was the discrepancy large? Those are things that as we look at our processes, we will bring information to you, and you might already have it, but it's important that you know what has happened this year and what could happen in the future. So to me, that's a very important element because it's your number one source of revenues. You have other sources. And I'll give you one example. As I was looking at the line item in your budget, you have areas that are smaller revenues, but they're also forecasted, whether they're interest or redevelopment funds or a variety. And many districts take very conservative approaches to budgeting. I do too. The big question is when we've taken that approach, does it show that our budget is a lot lower and perhaps we can be a little less conservative if the outcome is always much larger? So your question is very important, especially on the revenue side. We need to make sure that we project our revenues in a realistic way so that at the beginning of the year doesn't look like we're incredibly upside down, because by the time we finish the budget, March 15 would have passed, as Board Director Thompson said, and as you mentioned, some of those strategies are no longer allowable, but you still now have this big discrepancy because your expenses are what's projected and your revenues suddenly are a lot smaller. So looking at the revenues is very important. The expenditures, as we look at our budgets in the district, one of my areas of concern is, do we believe we're going to spend a lot more in a particular category than we actually do? So what we're doing now, whether it's Latanya, myself, Makai, and your team with Ryan, is going back in time a little bit and say, when we forecasted this expenditure, a service, consultants, the board member online mentioned our cost. It's a big cost. How was it forecasted in the past? What has been your trend? And that is very important, because what I'm noticing in some of your budgets is that expenditures that appear we were going to make, by the end of the year, they were a little smaller, or in some cases a little larger. And it's important for us to explain why. Those differentials, if we begin to reduce them, make the budget be a lot more realistic throughout the year and not end up in the situation that you have been sometimes, which is you forecast a very, very difficult budget, and what happens at the end of the year is that it's actually a little bit better. And that has, I'm sure you've had these discussions. I'm not telling you anything new, so I applaud your board member online saying, is this person not telling you anything we don't know? Well, our job is not to bring you things that you've never heard. Our job is to consolidate all this information to develop a better budgetary system. Your experienced board members, of course you know. So I applaud that he's paying attention to all these things. And no, this is not magic. We are not telling you, you're good. That's not our message. If you notice, the message is very serious. There's work that needs to be done. And whether you choose that we do it or somebody else does it, there are plenty of qualified people in Northern California, in Southern California, everywhere. You need to have somebody that can work with your team and make sure that it fits the culture and it fits the team and they work at the pace that you want to work to make sure that you accomplish the only goal that you have in finance, and that's to have a solvent district. So to me, I welcome your questions. There was one more that you had, and I think I forgot it. But if you can remind us either now or later, we're happy to address
I
it.
think the one that
President Brohard, I was cut off after 3 minutes. Now Director Lotta is well over 7 minutes for her time. It's just not okay that I get cut off, but everyone else is allowed to keep going back and forth.
Excuse me,
whenever they
Director
want.
Hutchinson, the buzzer did not ring before her questions were answered. He asked if she could repeat.
Excuse me, the
Thank
buzzer,
you.
it's been on 00 for 4 minutes. What are you talking about? She can't go back and ask more now. She needs to wait till the second time, and I should be granted as much
Thank
time
you,
as she
Director
got for
Hutchinson.
Q&A. Thank you.
just one, my question was just around the positive.
This
getting
is
to a
out of
positive
order
certification.
until we start a second round of comments. I know we don't use parliamentary procedures, but this is extremely out of order. And so
Thank you.
are we going to use the clock or not? Because I control my own mute button. So I just want to know what the rules are tonight, and then I'll act accordingly. Thank you.
She's going to finish he had one more question, and he asked her to repeat the question.
Then I'm going to wait, and then I'm going to
Thank you.
I'm going to go ahead and finish next time too, because I control my own mute button, and I'm going to have as much time as everyone else is granted. I'm tired of being treated differently, and those days are over.
Sorry, just, I know you wanted me to repeat it. The one that you might have been asking about was the benchmarks to moving from qualified to positive certification for this year.
Yeah,
You should look up the ed code. It's all clearly listed in the ed code.
Director
All of
Hutchinson,
us
you're
should be
out of
familiar
order.
with it.
You
Thank
need to let Director.
I don't need to do anything but represent my constituents. And I'm not going to let more
All of
other
our
people
constituents
get-
would like to hear
and
from the
I'm not going to
board.
allow other
Thank
people
you.
to get more time to ask questions.
Director
than I
Hutchinson,
do.
that's enough.
Thank you. No, that's enough from you. Thank you.
The only comment that I can make about qualified versus negative certification or potentially going into positive is that if there is any opportunity for the board in the future, let's hope it never happens, but you find yourself in a situation where you have a significant structural imbalance and you are deliberating negative versus qualified. The only reason why I would go out of my way as your CBO or as an advisor to try to stay outside of the negative certification is, as I mentioned, the incredible amount of repercussions that come with it. And to me, if you have the ability to have your fiscal team, your academic team, your talent team, your operational team work together to make sure that the county feels they can approve a qualified certification, in my estimation, it's always preferable. And like I said, this is a large district. You should be getting advice about what we say from your county, from your team, from your own research. Nothing that we do in school finance is secret, but it is real because at the end of the day, your programs depend on your ability to make governance decisions, not somebody sent from the state or from the county, and certainly in your ability to tell all your constituents that you have the funds for the programs that you want implemented. So again, I never second guess past decisions because there is a basis for it, that there seems to be information, but I just think what the board did at this point gives you more flexibility. Enough said.
Thank you. Director Williams.
Thank you, President Brohart. I'm gonna try to keep this short. Whenever you say the word county, I kind of get like a little nervous, like, because they've been in this budget for the last 4 years, and they've had a third-party big map person in this budget. So they've lost all credibility with me, and every person I talk to say they're no good. They should have been able to identify some stuff, then actually sign off. At the beginning of this year, our county superintendent gave a boost of confidence. And it just really hurts, not only the board members here for as much grief we've been taking and disparaging and negative remarks, but the concern that families and educators have had. And I want to thank the county for creating that type of emotional environment. So I ask you to be careful when you want to lift the county up in my presence, because I'm going to cut it down. Yeah. And I know we need the county. We do need the county. We need them to approve it. But the fact is, this shouldn't have gotten this far if the county actually did their job 4 years ago.
I understand. The only thing I can tell you is that last statement that you said, I agree with what you're saying, but you said one statement that to me resonated for the work that we're going to be doing, is that ultimately they will be reviewing our information. I think you used the term, I know we'll need them. So elevating an agency that's regulatory is not in my nature. I'm not, I was always on the district side, and there were very contentious arguments sometimes with our regulatory agencies, whether they were state, federal, or local. So the goal is for us to use some of their resources. Remember, I mentioned to you, the board, one strategy is that if we can get them in the loop with the different strategies that we're using, it makes approval of reports a lot easier than when we simply go at the end and say, here it is, and then they can take a while or what have you. they are right now offering and opening the door for that use, that we use them for our purposes. And I think your superintendent has done a good job enabling communication. To me, that benefits Oakland.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
So it still won't stop my critique, but thank you.
Yeah.
I only have 14 seconds left. One of the things that I really wanted to, I didn't hear much from you in regards to these over-projecting of expenses. That's been a consistent problem in this particular district, where there's been an projecting. When we have a rise in revenue, like we did this year, over $45 million, then there was a over-projection of expenses of over $100 million. I think that that's something, hopefully, as we start to move forward, that we'll be clear in our presentation of where these expenses are. Board members really didn't get a clear idea of where that actually stood. Secondly, I think the conversation on restricted funds, it's always been a third rail for everybody. You know, it's something that you just can't touch. But I think there's more conversations for us to actually look at. Many of the reserves come with already expectations already attached to them. And then there are some that are not there. And then there's some reserves that can actually be brought back into our unrestricted reserve, very much similar like our
Thank you, Director
Medicare.
Williams, if you could.
I knew it. I knew she was going to do this to me. Our Medicare.
Actually, I'm the only one that she's done it to. Everyone else gets to keep talking.
Thank you. I'll send my questions by email. I
Sure,
knew
thank
we
you.
wouldn't have this.
Do you want to address this question?
I can.
Okay.
I actually echo what you're saying. We need to be looking at our budgets for opportunities. And I have a philosophy that I think the board has been looking at perhaps for some time, which is if we receive a dollar, what are the legal allowable uses for that dollar? And in some cases, you, with the experience that you have looking at your budgets, you know that you have balances in some areas, but a lot less in your unrestricted. So the first question that I ask is, when you have used unrestricted dollars for, let's say, services or programs that were allowable, legally allowable, in this other fund, have we made that choice? And your teams have been very honest in saying sometimes our culture has not been that. Notice they're not saying we refuse to do it or the board hasn't directed it. It's just been a past practice. What I'm bringing to you as a challenge, and it's our challenge, is to work with your team to sometimes think differently and say, if it's legally allowable, why don't we use the most restricted dollars first? And it's also a shift in philosophy. That doesn't have anything negative, and I think you addressed it.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. Director Barry?
Hi, thank you. Nice to meet you all. So first thing I wanted to say, I'm using my notes so I don't lose focus because I have a longer list of questions that I'll send to you. Love that we're continuing the language of trade-offs. I love that restructuring is explicit, although I think there is an opportunity for us to broaden the way we define restructuring, so it's not just about footprint, but all of the other systemic restructuring that we need. And I love that as an evolution from where we were on December 10th, that there's like a timeline of specific milestones, although I still think we're short of a plan. I think of the stuff that's missing, I think we asked a few questions, several questions on December 10th that remain unanswered. And so I'm hoping that at our board meeting next week, that the plan you present at least addresses those questions, more clarity around the numbers. You mentioned updating some of the options, the tactics, so I'm looking forward to seeing that. But I think with those tactics, presenting estimates and projections that are validated by the data would be helpful. I think I'm excited, as others have echoed, that a $100 million deficit is actually a $50 million deficit.
I would love, I know spreadsheets are confusing and like difficult to understand, but I would love a confusing spreadsheet right now so I can see the data behind that number, because I don't think any of us had that tonight. And then I also would love to hear how you're advising the team on reconciling that 50 million in light of the open labor negotiations right now. I also missing is a process, and I think this might feel less urgent to some folks, but feels really urgent to me, just thinking about strategy and the district overall, how this conversation about budget development and the surgical precision that Dr. Sadler referred to is related to the conversation around teaching and learning. So as we make these budget decisions, what's our vision for teaching and learning that we're also sort of using to drive some of the decisions we're making, particularly around prioritization and trade-offs. And then, how much, 30 seconds. So I'm curious on the freeze, the restoration of the 2% reserve, how much money did we save over the last several weeks? And similar to the question that Director Lada asked, how was the reserve actually restored? I think that's just good information for us as we build a list of best practices. And then I'm also curious what we learned when we did that comprehensive sort of like examination of central and site spending over the last several weeks, and how we plan to bake those lessons into some of the tactics that you'll suggest to us in the plan that we'll see next week. And then I will, if we have a second round, ask the remaining.
Go ahead, you want to answer those questions?
Well, actually, those questions had almost, they answer themselves. We need to bring that detailed information, but more importantly, you mentioned something that is part of that opportunity that I was talking about. One of the goals of looking at your budgets, and those numbers as we finalize them with your fiscal team have to be part of the presentation on January 28th, is that unspent funds are not new in the district. You've had that in the past. So as we look at doing, let's call them for now, a shift in costing from unrestricted to restricted, we have to show you that, because that is something that will allow us to achieve these balances. You mentioned what are some of let me go back to your original example of a big spreadsheet. One of the things that we started doing with the fiscal team is looking at all the different lines of expenditures that you have. And that's why I mentioned a few categories that we're looking at on the revenue side, interest or development funds, on the expenditure side, services that we budgeted on a certain amount and we haven't spent but let's say 20% of it, and here we are second semester. So all those categories are the things that we are looking at with your fiscal team, and that's how we were able to go from 100 to about 50, including the shifts of supplementary and concentration. So we have to bring you that detail once we finish verifying all our amounts. Over the weekend, as I was looking at a couple of your budgets, and I brought this to the attention of your superintendent, there are a couple of areas where it looks like we have spent almost the entirety of what we budgeted. It might be that there is a recapture, that there's going to be funds somewhere else, but I need to make sure that we don't come to you and say, look, we saved $51 million, but we have over expenditures here of a couple of $1 million. So we are looking at that with your fiscal team to bring detail, and our expectation is that on the 28th and then on the subsequent meetings, you will see the detail not just of what we are shifting, but also the impacts that they have. In one of our planning sessions, one of your team members mentioned we need to make sure that we tell the board that when a dollar is shifted into from unrestricted to restricted, there's a potential consequence if that dollar was going to be used for a program in the future or what have you. That's an important consideration. So I need to make sure that as we work with the team, we don't just say, oh, we freed up a dollar, but what is the consequence of that dollar that suddenly is now shifted from unrestricted to restricted funding? So I hear everything you said. We need to bring more detail. To do the work that we did in the approval of the first interim, one of the most important elements was to look at unspent balances. And the reason why you do that, that doesn't negatively impact any of the work that you're presently doing. But remember, what I said is that we have a structural imbalance. So eventually, we need to look at making cost reductions that will impact things, including things in the general fund. So we will come back with more detail if the superintendent is interested. We might send an advance copy to you, the board, and if you have questions, they can be addressed. That's part of the work that we're doing right now.
Thank you. Vice President Batchelor?
Thank you. I appreciate the work and the rigor it took to get us where we are today, with a more realistic projection of the gap between our revenue and expenses, and an open discussion about the work that lies ahead. I also want to appreciate the students, families, and staff who asked questions, reached out, and encouraged us to take a deep dive into the budget. As a community, we knew there was something more to the story than what was being shouted out from the dais, written in convoluted presentations, and reported in the media. As we continue to discuss the budget and realign our spending priorities, I want to take a step back and share some of my priorities. First, as a system, we must work to increase enrollment and attendance. In order to provide the educational environment our students deserve and retain qualified, talented staff, we must take all necessary steps to increase our enrollment and average daily attendance. That's why I'm supporting our enrollment stabilization work, the TK hubs, and an in-district non-public school. If we do the work right, this will lead to safe and stable school campuses that are fully staffed and supported. Second, we must also pursue strategies to recruit and retain qualified staff throughout the system, but most importantly, at our schools. All OUSD students deserve qualified, talented staff that stay year after year to support their education, social and emotional growth, and provide safety at school. That's why I support taking all the steps necessary to raise staff wages for every single staff, especially our lowest paid staff, limiting our use of layoffs notices, because again, this is a strategic tactic that we don't want to use because it creates chaos and hurt throughout the district, especially at our school sites. I also support the recommendations from the Contracting Out Task Force and look forward to the updated board policy and administrative regulations that will come from that. And I also support the proven strategies of recruitment and retention, such as moving forward with workforce housing. But most importantly, the education of our students must be at the center of the way we budget. If we fund a strategy, program, or position, it must be clear and transparently connected to the educational experience of our students. We are, after all, a public school district that must educate students in the city of Oakland. That is why I'm eager to keep working on our facilities master plan to make sure that we're able to get information so that we're able to provide a baseline of educational adequacy in our schools and invest in the modernization of our school facilities and support our students and families every single day. In the second round, I will have some more questions for you all.
My questions are a little more, I guess, related to the presentation. I wanted to go, you mentioned a slide, and I think it's one where you show it's a bar chart, and where you talk about the fluctuations in of restricted money and unrestricted money. I think it was unrestricted money.
Yes.
Can you explain maybe how those fluctuations, what the significance of them is? How do we read those in our budget?
So one of the things that the board knows is that your enrollment trends are going down. You also know that we received a significant amount of one-time money a few years ago. So when you look at your numbers of students, at the fact that one-time money is sunsetting, and what the state provides, which is the majority of your funding every year, most of the time my expectation is that it will not be difficult to trend what will be the next year. This year, for example, we already know approximately what the COLA would be. As you know, that's a group of little economic indicators that show us inflation at the end, and it drives a lot of the decision making for the subsequent year. So I was a little bit surprised when I first started looking at your multi-year reports that you have, well, the line chart shows it too. You go up and down between budget and actual and from year to year. And I wish I could tell you this is exactly what is happening, but what I do know is that your enrollment is not trending up. And I do know that you are not receiving significant one-time funding out of some program, because all districts would if it was a state initiative or a federal initiative. So at this point, my concern is simply to try to understand, as the team forecasts for next year, since you have ups and downs, and I can't find, for example, what exactly will be the next, is it an up, is it a down? We are going to have to look at simply what we have, which is enrollment data, some factors for increases, let's say in insurances or in services. And it allows for simplistic budgeting, and that's what most districts do, and it serves the purpose. But because of the way your budget has moved, I want to make sure that we have conversations, especially with your superintendent and all the vast history that she has, to say, what happened that year? We know, for example, that there have been times where you had some actions in the district that impacted your staffing and your enrollment. And that hopefully will not repeat. So part of our job, since we are outsiders, is to talk to you, the insiders that have been here for a long time, and say, what has happened, and can any of this happen this next year as we look at creating solvency? Because one of the worst things that we could do is come to you and say, based on a simple budgetary analysis, this is what you need to cut 10% to everyone, and that's it. One of you just said that we need to look at programs, and I think it was a couple of board members that said that. Wholesale cuts are very easy. You pay us, we're gone, we're done. But that doesn't serve our purpose of looking, that's why we're looking at every object code and all that to say, what happened? How come this went up? How come this went down? Because ultimately, you have programs that you want to protect, and a wholesale cut sometimes doesn't work very well. So if eventually our approach doesn't work, and that's what the governance team wants to do, makes everyone's life a lot easier. But it shouldn't be the first approach. We really should be doing what are opportunities in all these line items that we have, and do we have to spend this much money on X or on Y? And your team has spent a lot of time at night telling me, why did we do this? Why did we do that? And that history helps us as we look at, well, it shouldn't be $5 million next year because we've averaged 2, and we budgeted 5 because we thought, but maybe we can do it with 3. And I know it's a simple example, but that's what I believe we need to do, because most of you talked about protecting program, being student-centered, and doing what is right for the district. It's very difficult to do that if we don't look individually at almost every action that the district has taken. And it does take time, and it makes coming back to you to say, we have exactly $51,275,072 when we see the fluctuations in some of your areas. I mentioned a couple of examples on the revenue side. I can mention examples to you on the expenditure side. Your cost of benefits is growing at a much more rapid rate than any of your other employment costs. Not uncommon, because medical insurance, right? So it's not like we don't know. But the big question is, how much more can we sustain? It's not an issue where at all we are concerned about not being able to offer any of these benefits. They're all being offered. But then we need to come back and say, are we getting the right, let's say, the right costing? Do we benefit from the economies of scale that a district our size has? Those are lengthy conversations, because somebody might say, we tried everything. We went with this group, and we went with that group, and we're doing the best that we can. Fantastic, but at least we looked at it. And that takes time.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
We'll take one more round with 3 minutes each. Director Hutchinson, you have 3 minutes.
Yes, thank you. Hopefully everyone will be restricted to those 3 minutes this time. It's pretty interesting that the contracting task force was referenced. It's clear now from this board that when we're talking about a contracting task force and limiting outside consultants, that it doesn't apply to financial advisors who are being paid $400 per hour per person to do this work, which is not only unacceptable, it's amazing, and we're still paying Lisa Grant Dawson as well. We had credibility in our budget, and we had a budget team until they were forced out by this superintendent and this board. I mean, at the last board meeting, we just had a presentation on enrollment from our head of enrollment, who went over past enrollment and future trends. And now to hear a consultant referencing those are things we need to look at, it's clear these folks know nothing about us and really have nothing to offer us going forward. We need to remember that when the budget for this current school year, 25-26, was approved, we were projecting a deficit of $72 million for the following year. We were told by both the county and Superintendent Sadler that as a board, we had to take action by October 8th. None of that happened. No action was taken. And here we are now in mid-January, and there's still not even the beginning of a plan. Now, I remember what things were like before Lisa Grant Dawson came here, and is very reminiscent now of what we see going on. Not only was Lisa Grant Dawson and Dr. Johnson Trammell the reasons why we were able to leave receivership, before Lisa Grant Dawson came for a full year, OUSD had an outside consultant operating as our CBO and CFO, Luz Cazares, who then wound up being the state trustee afterwards. And the amazing fact is she got paid about $400,000 that year. Now we're paying consultants to do that work, and these folks' contract ends on May 1st. Before Luz came, it was even crazier. This is reminiscent of the stuff I had to do battle with Troy Christmas and Vernon Howe back in the day, where folks would stand and make presentations with not one document, not one number in front of them. It's unacceptable to just sit up here and flap your gums and say numbers when there's no proof of anything. So I have a series of questions I would like to have answered. Have the new people examined our prior year SACS reports, which list assumptions and multi-year projections? Has anyone on this new team contacted Lisa Grant Dawson or Kyla Johnson Trammell? Why are there no numbers being presented today at all? Has the current overspending in this school year been addressed, and how much have we cut in that spending? Who is actually now managing OUSD's finances and budget development? Is it these outside consultants? Is it a new staff person that we haven't even heard from?
Thank
Who
you,
is
Director
in
Hutchinson.
charge?
Your time
And my
is up.
last question is,
Okay.
the county certified all of our budget numbers every year. So is it now being told to us that we were wrong, that our CBO was wrong, and that the county were wrong when they certified our budget deficit, and now that our projected budget deficit for next year is only $50 million? So I would like at least some of those questions to be answered, please.
Thank you. Would you like to answer those questions?
I will do my best.
Okay, thank you.
Let me start with the multi-year question that the board director asked. Yes, we are looking at multi-years. The request for information and the data that we've been looking goes back to 2021, 21-22, 22-23, 23-24, both budget and actuals, 24-25, 25-26, and then the multi-year projections. SACS reporting is the state mandated budgets. It's one way to look at the information. For us to do the initial analysis, we actually went into all the detail of all the object codes as provided by the financial team. No, we have not contacted prior staff because it's very important to us to first understand the data that we have. And the data is coming from your reports, which are audited. So I agree with the board director online. We need to look at this information. Is very important. Whether you had certifications before for your reports, well, that's mandated. No matter what the outcome is, they have to be looked at and approved or disapproved. So what you did in the past, if it was audited, we consider to be information that's useful to us and credible because it was audited. The fluctuations that I mentioned to you are by no means disrespectful. They're the reality of your actuals. We're looking at the money that you're spending currently, so I don't have a judgment when I come to you and say, you thought you were going to spend $5 million and you spent $2 million. I'm looking at your budget and your actuals side by side. So again, whichever team you choose to work with, an internal CBO, an external team, they should all be looking at all the line items in your budget and look at before and look at the future. Because without that, opportunities are missed. And one of the important things to me is to not come to you with any type of wholesale reduction. I'm repeating myself, but it's very important because life can be very easy and just say we're in trouble. But if there are opportunities or things that we can adjust, that can be done. And I think one of the final comments made were that the district already had financial experts. I believe you did. You had many years where your budgets were audited. They passed the audits, I'm assuming. I'm assuming you didn't have any rejections. So what you are doing now in bringing folks that have an outside perspective can serve a purpose, but there was a question from the board director as to who is managing your finances. Is it the consultants? No, we're not. We will not do that. That's not our job. Our job is to work with your team to provide information, to do analytical data, to report to you. But you have a chief financial officer on staff, and you have a team that does the work. You have an operational team that's working on all your other funds, such as facilities and nutrition. You have an academic officer that's working in conjunction with your fiscal team on your local control formula and your LCAP. So you have a team that's actually in charge, led by your superintendent. Our job is to help them and hopefully provide information to you that can assist you in your plan, which we didn't develop, scenario 3, and shape it a little differently, hopefully, so that we don't have to have the drastic reductions that you believe need to be done at the time. So I'm not in disagreement with any of the items.
I just want to cut you off because they're not going to cut off my time. Scenario 3 is not a plan, but the most important question that I asked is how come there are no numbers here? You cited a number of examples, but we don't have one document or one firm number in writing to hold anything to.
Thank you.
And that's just not good enough for the state that we're in. So when either Superintendent Sadler, you make a statement, or anyone that you bring forward makes a statement, we need to have firm numbers and documents in front of us, because just saying it doesn't make it true, especially when what's being said is diametrically opposed to what we've been told and working on for the last 3 years. So why are there no numbers? Where are the numbers to reflect these changes? And why are they not being produced tonight if obviously this is the work that people have been doing?
I can answer that. One of the important elements that we were tasked with was to work on approving the first interim report as a qualified, not a negative. And in order to do that, it's beyond simply producing a report to say, here are numbers.
I'm sorry, since this is my time, I'm going to
Excuse
stop.
me, no, he's going to answer your question, Director
The
Hutchinson.
first interim report.
Excuse me, please allow him to answer your question. Thank you.
The first interim.
We'll come back for a third round if we need to.
The first interim report was approved.
Director Hutchinson.
Before he was under contract. They weren't under contract to work on the first interim
excuse me.
report at all. So that is just not true.
No.
It's not true, and I'm not going to let that
You've
be
asked
said
him a
and answering
question.
my
He's
question.
allowed to
That's not
answer
the
that
numbers
question.
that I'm talking about.
Thank you. Can
Were
go ahead
you
and
under
continue?
were you
Excuse
under
me.
contract? Were you under contract in December when the first interim report was changed to qualify by the board against the advice of the superintendent and staff? I'll change my question to that then.
Okay, but let him answer the question, please.
So when we were first engaged in our conversations with the leadership of the district and the County Office of Education, it was clear to, at least to me, and everyone can have their opinion, that the county was inclined to give you a negative certification. The first task that we had was to work with your team to see what are some opportunities within the budget that we can look at in order for us to get a qualified certification. I agree 100%. We did not complete your first interim report. We were actually not part of your engagement in how you reached the point of saying negative. What I do know is that the superintendent organized a meeting with the county. We met, we discussed different options, and they felt comfortable giving you a qualified certification. It doesn't guarantee anything for the future, and thus the question of the board director is good. how do we look at data? Well, we're still trying to make sure that what we are reviewing is correct. I don't feel comfortable presenting anything except the reality. You have a qualified certification right now, and we presented to you what we're going to do. This is my first opportunity to tell you this is what we're going to do. I would be remiss if I came to you and say, I work with one of your staff and we found $3 million in this category. Well, I also told you there are categories where I think you might be overspent. So we also need a little more time. It's been technically a few days since we started working with you. But I don't disagree with you and with some of the other board directors that have said we need to look at information, and that's our goal for the next session. The other piece is where we hear, I think, when said, and the interim report had already been completed. Absolutely. I think it had been submitted to the county already. My task was not to redo your interim report. It was to look at it and have a conversation with the group that approves it, including their business team, and to say, we believe we can have a different outcome. And that's, I think, where we are today.
And given all of that, it shouldn't have been stated at the start of the presentation that our deficit is only $50 million, because you had
Thank
no
you,
problem
Director
giving that
Hutchinson.
firm
I'm going
number.
to hear from
And that's the
Director
only firm
Thompson
number
now.
that you gave. That is the point that I'm trying to make. And this is highly offensive and actually embarrassing as a school board.
Thank
But
you.
the one number you gave was what our deficit is with no proof to back it up. And now you say you don't feel comfortable giving numbers.
Okay, your time is up. Now I'm going to turn the mic over to Director Thompson if you have a second round of questions.
This will be pretty fast. Thank you very much. But as you can probably tell, I'm a nuts and bolts type individual. I was looking at number 6, page 16, and quite impressed with the fact that you have listed some support actions that you would take. And I'm really excited that the support actions include actually facilitating the community's understanding of the budget itself. Also working with those of us who sit up here on the governance team. If you don't mind, can you spend a couple of seconds and maybe tell us what that looks like?
Absolutely. So one of the things that I mentioned to your leadership team is that I believe in the development of roadmaps, and that comes from governance, not from accounting and finance. And that allows a board, and I'll give you an example. One of the things that I like to bring forward at some point over the next few weeks is a checklist that you can see. This is why a regulatory agency that's looking at our budgets would be looking at and checking. And then you can ask, and give you an example, the multi-year projection. Well, how do they look at it? Do they look, obviously what they're looking at, solvency for the district in subsequent years. So that begins to tell the board, I have a piece of paper here that allows me to check, and if all this is done, it's similar to what the county or any representative from the state that's reviewing your budgets would look at. The other one is, what are important elements? As much as some of the board directors have said we need to see concrete data. That's fantastic. That's not a problem, and your team is preparing that. My job is to come to you and say what's important is enrollment versus attendance. So what should you be expecting? That regularly we should be telling you this was our enrollment and this is our current attendance, and it's improving. It's not 89.4%. It's now 89.6 or 90 or 91. The closer it gets to 100, the more funding you get. Obviously, nobody does 100, so I don't want to be quoted on that. But it is important that we give you parameters and areas where it's very important for the direction you are giving your district, things to look at. The other thing is, if we have an ongoing structural challenge, let's say that, and I hope it doesn't happen, that your enrollment continues to decline over time. It's very, very important that you say, what are you going to be doing to project not only the necessary staffing, but the necessary funding that you'll be able to provide your schools and your central programs. Because if we continue to contract, you can say, what are you doing in the central office to adjust to that contraction and provision of services? One of you mentioned non-public schools and a variety of programs. Very, very important. And sometimes with some of those programs, all the different interactions that we can do financially don't change the obligations for the program. So part of the real conversation that your team will have with you, and we are happy to work with them and coach them, is this is the cost of this program. If the board thinks it's necessary, and it is, then this is the cost, but this is how much funding we have. And those are real conversations that at some point the board is going to have to continue to say, we want to maintain this program, or we want to perhaps increase a program. But the one thing we cannot do is generate funding that's substantial at this point outside of your attendance. I continue to see this as your primary job. You have a great granting team and has brought a lot of good money. But if we don't stabilize your expenditures to your revenues, which are attendance driven, you will continue to have a structural program. And that's a reality. And again, you don't need specific numbers for direction sometimes. You need to know what are your areas of concern. And I think I identified two very important ones right now: your discrepancy between enrollment and attendance, your expenditures exceeding your revenues, and those have to be addressed. We will give you numbers, but just know that those need to be addressed in order for you to be solvent.
Thank you. Director Latta?
I'll defer the second round so we can get to public comment sooner.
Director Williams?
Thank you again. Apologize for being triggered by the county.
It's okay.
So, yeah, I just think I just want to say I want to appreciate the work you've done. Thank you for bringing the good news. It's good news because in the face of $100 million, having that in half to $50 million, a little bit more workable. We cut $100 million in March. And, you know, folks, constituents say, I said, we were tasked with actually cutting $200 million within a full year's budget time. So being that we've been able to look at the budget and find that, you know, we can look at how we are expensing things and really bringing it down. I really know that there are other particular categories that we can continue to look for. So I look forward to hearing the follow-up that you have, because I think whenever I hear about like vacancies, you know, I think about our lowest paid workers. You know, we balancing the budget on the backs of our kids as well as our lowest paid workers. It's taken them quite a while to get just a living wage, and all of our living wage workers, as well as our educators. And so this sense of like, you know, how we go about projecting out expenses in a way is necessary, but also we have to predict about how we're going to keep our workers, you know, how we're going to keep those who are doing the work that many of us just don't do, and that we have to be respectful to those individuals. So when if there's this conversation that is floating around in regards to rebalancing work staff or rebalancing schools, I think hopefully you will bring those conversations to us so we can really be able to engage that work, because I think that year after year after year, March 15th notices bring a lot of grief and heartbreak and pain to a lot of our workers, and we just haven't been able to fix that. And I hope this is a process that we will not only continue to project out, but also to look at our budget in a humane way to really see where the best outcomes are coming from, and looking at how to invest in those who can do the work, like in-house contracting, right? And really developing our staff to do that particular work, or really analyzing our special ed, you know, funds to see, or our transportation funds as well, to kind of see where we need to be. So I hope that, you know, we will have multiple conversations. I think it's going to be important for us also to not only have this board conversation, but be in our districts and be able to talk to our constituents, our parents, our families, who actually live there, who may not be watching this board meeting right now, and have the necessary information so they can actually digest it and understand it. I think that's going to be really important. Thank you once again. Appreciate your calmness and the information you provided. Look forward to working with you. And I just want to say to Dr. Sadler, thank you very much. I see your leadership on display by having your team come together. We haven't seen this in quite a while, and I appreciate what you're doing. Thank you.
Mainly a comment to the different areas that the board director touched upon. As I mentioned before, we are temps. We literally are here temporarily to assist the district, and with the best of intentions, I believe our team will find information that's useful to you. But there is one thing that's very important. Up until however long ago, you had a traditional staffing system. You had a superintendent with a CBO, with a CFO underneath, a CAO, an operational person, et cetera, et cetera. Right now, you don't have a CBO. And one of the first things that I noticed is that you have a lot of well-intentioned managers doing fantastic work, getting all their reports done, and they all communicate to your superintendent. But many times the CBO job is not to be an accountant, is to aggregate information to come to you with good decisions that then you can decide yay or nay through your superintendent, who is your main employee. My job as a CBO was to keep my superintendent very well informed. Right now, as we continue moving on this year, let's assume that you hadn't hired us or anybody else. You have a CFO that has an obligation to complete a variety of reports. You have a CEO that's working on perhaps some issuances, perhaps some future financing, et cetera. And you have a CAO that has to continue to implement instructional programs while at the same time working on the local control plan, not only for this year, make sure it was done right, but for the future. You have a talent office that's doing all the things that we all know HR does. So what are the duties of the CBO? Well, eventually you're going to have to decide what your structure is. I'm a retired person. It doesn't impact me. PERS treats me very well every month. But right now, as it is, the way you are structured, you need somebody to aggregate this information and meet with the teams, which is what your superintendent tasked us in part to do. And she's been doing. We meet on weekends, we meet at night. Sometimes it's not accounting work. Sometimes the most important thing is to say, I saw this in your area of expertise. What do you think about us doing this that you haven't done before? And the responses sometimes are surprising. They're, well, wait a minute, why are we doing this? Or why? And that's the engagement that we have. And those opportunities, it's what temporarily will give you the allowance to continue being qualified or positive. But I want to be very clear. Your structural imbalance is significant enough that no matter who you bring, a CFO, a CBO, whatever you want to call the person, eventually you are going to have to make some significant restructuring of your budgeting process because the differences are not going away over time. So I want to be clear. Your board director online mentioned credibility, which I agree with. A lot of that will not have to do with accounting because you have limited funds. We can account all day long, that's fine. A lot of it will have to do with strategies coming from the governance team, hopefully with the recommendation of somebody like me that's aggregated all the information from the other teams and say, these are some of the changes that we need to do. By the way, your prior CBO did some of that. Whether you agreed with that person or not, there were some strategies coming forward. I believe that needs to happen again. There might be different strategies now that we have a different kind of balance. But make no mistake, there are some things that somebody has to come in and say, we've talked to the SUP, we've talked to academics, we've talked to facilities, we've talked to this group, we've talked to this group, and this is what we need to do. Otherwise, you don't have multi-year projections that are solvent. And that goes beyond accounting. That has to be strategies working with you. And that goes back to, I think, Board Director Thompson about training the board and all that. So I'm in agreement 100%, and whether our team does it or another team, I just urge you not to forget that there's a reason why there's a business officer. And it's not necessarily just to produce financial reports. It's to also look at the entirety of the administrative portion of your district and make sure that a support system is created for the real important work, which is the academic work. And sometimes there's a void. If that was a little hard, I apologize, but I needed to make sure that that's the structure that I see and the needs right now.
Thank you, I appreciate that. Director Barry.
I just want to say quickly, I appreciate you for naming that, because I think sometimes the conversation I hear is getting caught up of us like passing the test of like certifying as qualified. That is just an indicator. It is not fiscal health, right? And so like the goal is fiscal health, and we need to do more than just pass the next test and then, you know, pass a second interim budget that's qualified. But I'm going to try not to use all my time like Director Latta. Thank you for reminding us that we still have public comment. And I just want to ask one last question. I'll send the others. It's just like, what can we expect next week? There's an indication of a fiscal recovery and solvency plan. What does that mean? What will it include? What questions will be answered so that we can orient our minds around what we can expect? And then if there are gaps, we can get those addressed between now and next week.
So there are two different things that I believe the team needs to bring forward. One is the list of modifications, reductions, and shifts that allows us to go from the perceived 100 plus, I saw 119, 103, 104, whatever the over $100 million was, to currently where we are, which is at around $50 million. That needs to be seen by the board and be confirmed by us. That's what we're working on, whether it's, like I said, a reduction in a contribution from the general fund to an account or whatever, that needs to be finished. And Ryan has been working with Preston and with Sandra and with your superintendent and with the entire team to make sure that there's agreement on that. But that has to be part of what you will see balancing with the second interim. So at some point there needs to be agreement between all the reports. So my job is to just make sure that that's done correctly. Your second interim report is something that your staff will be preparing, but by next week when we meet, some of those numbers need to be real because they will populate what we do for second interim and for budget. The other piece is the beginning of budget development. At the same time that we're talking about surviving, and I like the way you, the board directors, have been saying, what you're doing right now are just stopgap measures to make sure that we can keep going. Absolutely. Nothing that we have said today is a board-approved structural restructuring of our budgets. That will have to come later. Some of the things that you propose in scenario 3 will give you great savings into the future. But ultimately, there has to be further discussion to make sure you're solvent in the long run. And no manipulation of me grabbing $1 out of restricted into unrestricted will satisfy that. But it might get us to a positive second interim and to the beginning of good beginning balances for a budget development. That's a huge difference than where we are today. So my intent, to answer your question, is to bring detail on the 50 million and also to say we believe these are things that still need to be done as we do budget development. If we can accomplish that in a way that is clear to you and we can stand by, I think we're going to call it a day that day.
Thank you. Vice President Batchelor.
Thank you. For my first two questions, I'd like to invite our CFO to come up, Mr. Nguyen. So there's been at least 2 board directors that have mentioned a $15 million deficit for the current year. Can you tell us what is the deficit for our current year?
Good evening, Board of Directors and Superintendent and staff. The 15 million that I hear, I think there might have been a miscommunication regarding what that is. For first interim, when we certified as negative and then we switched to qualified, it's because there was an assumption that we were going to designate S&C fund balance carryover as part of REU. But since I've been tasked in the last week or so to work with Mr. Rubin and our SLT team, we've come up with various budgeting strategy, which usually is a standard budgeting methodology to restore the fund balance for unrestricted. And the details of that strategy and the results will be presented next week in more detail.
Thank you so much. And according to your opinion or your knowledge, do we have a positive cash flow for this year?
As of current today, I just ran the cash flow report. We have $186 million currently. And April, we're going to receive a lot more cash. So cash flow, as far as Fund 1, it's in an uneven distribution from the state. And so, yeah, it just right now we have plenty of cash, and we are projected to have positive cash flow by year end.
Thank you so much. Appreciate you. So I did have some questions for you now, Mr. Frutos, about the communication with the county. So you did share that they had some concerns. Can you tell us a little bit about what are some of those concerns about the qualified budget? And then just my last question, so I can sneak it in. Because of the oversight role that the county has had for the last few years, my constituents are very curious about what the county's role in helping us would look like if the county hasn't provided us help in the past. Can you provide me with specific examples of the slide that you have where it says leveraging the county fiscal team to guide structural changes in the budget and financial reporting?
So one of the important discussions that the Board of Directors brought to my attention is that in the past, the county office perhaps has not been our best ally. And that goes without saying. That's the case in some relationships between districts and county offices. But what I do know is that whether it's a negotiated agreement or a budget or an interim report, ultimately they approve it. And my expectation is that we need to facilitate the communication that your superintendent has and the direction that your superintendent gives staff, including your consultants, to make sure that that communication is good and that the reports are approved. So one example, in the bargaining process, the county ultimately approves what you, the board, has given as parameters and what becomes a settlement. Fantastic. But if you have the good communication that your bargaining team has had with them, chances are they don't have a lot of questions and things get approved. The same goes for the budgeting process. We want to make sure that if we believe that we can have a negative a qualified certification or a positive certification, that we're working with the county in advance and say, this is what we're thinking of doing. They were very clear with us that they believe we have a structural imbalance. Well, we know that too. Our board member online mentioned, we've known this information for a while. We agree. The county knows. It's not like they don't look at our budgets. And to the board director, they're not our friends. They are a regulatory agency. They can be our partners if we get to that, but that's very different. So to me, the important element from the county and the things that they're questioning is how are we, for example, going to them with a negotiated settlement agreement when you have potentially a negative budget? It's a good question. You just went to them and say, approve this settlement agreement, and they're working with your team on that. At the same time, we are coming to them and say, we don't have a negative budget, we have a qualified budget, and they have to reconcile that. So part of this communication is to make sure we understand their role. Again, their job is not to be our friend, their job is to be the regulatory agency that provides oversight, but they are at this point willing to say, we can communicate. So my goal with Ryan's team is to make sure he's communicating with their staff. We've met at least 2 of their folks and communicated. They've sent us a couple of reports with questions. And the biggest question that they have is, why are you projecting the enrollment and attendance that you're projecting? Our job is to say, we believe we're correct and this is why, or not. And why do you do some of the expenses that you're doing when you have these significant structural imbalances? That's very difficult to answer if we expect that they're going to say, yes, you have better than negative certifications. So I completely agree with the board members about their role and perhaps the challenges of the past. My goal is to make sure that they're listening to us, that they're providing that ear that says this is our interim data. And I don't mean interim report, I mean in between reports, are you okay with it? Because that allows approvals to be easier. If they know, it makes us also a little stronger in saying, You knew all along, I think it's to your point. So how can you suddenly have a different opinion? And your superintendent did a wonderful job with the qualified, because the number one signal of a qualified certification is that the board members did not receive a negative letter. Did you receive a negative letter? You did not, and the timeline already passed, if I recall. So sometimes not getting something is a good sign, because what you would have gotten, that gift, would have been a bad letter. So if we can continue that dialogue, I will always appreciate what you said, because make no mistake, we know their role. But if sometimes even with an agency where there's friction, if you have good communication, you can use them in a way that's beneficial to our agency. That's my point.
Thank you.
And notice, nothing in numbers. This is all procedural.
Yeah. Oh, thank you. At this time, we're going to take public comment. We'll come back for a third round of board questions if there are further questions. Mr. Secha, how many public speakers do we have?
Yes, we have 9 registered speakers.
Okay, let's give 2 minutes each. And do we have any online?
Yes, we do.
Let's do the in-person first.
In person, we have Matt Glacier, Kerry Koofman, Brandon Wall, Oliver Brennan, and Carmelina Reyes.
Good evening, Board Directors and Superintendent Sadler. As a delegate to the LCAP Parent Student Advisory Committee, wanted to come down here and take in this presentation. As most of you have said, there are a lot of outstanding questions about details, and the stated reduction of the deficit by $50 million is obviously, on the face of it, great news, but I'm taking it with a grain of salt. I believe most of the community is, and while I can see some developments here, I'm personally pretty concerned about the idea of shifting funding. Rich Alata spoke about this earlier. And it's basically about the idea that part of this deficit reduction is it actually found money, or is this money that is being shifted away from the base fund into things like S&C? There are slides that refer to this. And since S&C funding is designed to fund services for unduplicated pupils, there are some concerns that we'll have absolutely on the PSAC. And so I did want to just sort of in the open say that the board should keep a few key questions in mind as this process moves forward and as we hear more details. We really want to know, or I would really like to know, and I think everybody should keep in mind, we want to know how the district's going to maintain good faith compliance with LCFF requirements, because obviously the S&C funding is designated to fund services for unduplicated pupils, and many of these costs that are in the base fund are currently services designated, or they're not currently services designated for UPs. And if the plan is to move some number of dollars into S&C, what current S&C investments are going to be cut out to make room for that? Yeah, those are the major questions that I have. Thank you.
Thank you. Next speaker, please.
Hello, everyone. My name is Brandon Wall, and I'm a parent of students at Crocker and Brewer. A friend told me that school boards almost never make hard decisions until they must. And I'm wondering, is this new strategy using more supplemental and concentration dollars for base fund expenditures just another example of kicking the can down the road? What supports and services were those funds intended for, and how will it affect the students furthest from opportunity to cut them? When we run short of road, we end up with fewer options, and we don't have enough time and capacity to make changes with the care and thoughtfulness that we should. Sure, we might be able to make payroll and stave off state receivership for a little longer than we expected, but is that a high enough bar to shoot for? How can we stick with the status quo that results in less than 19% of our third graders from low-income families to read on grade level? How can we stick with a status quo that results in fewer than half of high school students eligible to apply for a CSU or a UC? How can we stick with the status quo that doesn't pay our educators as much as they deserve? In Oakland, we get to spend more per student than almost everywhere else in the state. And I know there's an unrivaled amount of talent and passion among our educators and parents and community members. So I want to challenge us to choose to make those hard decisions today so that tomorrow Oakland graduates will be well equipped to lead the charge in solving the political, economic, and environmental problems that we're leaving them with. Thanks.
Thank you. Next speaker, please.
Good evening, Board. Oliver Brennan, parent of 2 kids in OUSD. You know, I've been very critical of this board for the last year and more, and I just want to say that it's amazing the work you've done now in a month. It's amazing that our deficit has gone in the general fund from 103 million to 50 million. It's amazing that we're no longer bleeding $4 million a month above income. It's amazing that you will be able to come here in 8 days' time and solve our deficit. It's amazing. It looked like we were going to go back into receivership after getting out last 1st of July, but it seems like, you know, hiring these consultants has been amazing. Like, we're really close. We're really there. I wish you luck in the next few weeks, but I'm really looking forward to seeing the numbers that back up this. It'll be very interesting. Thank you.
Thank you. Next speaker.
I want to steal his time. Hi, I'm Carmelita Reyes. I'm the principal of Redsdale Continuation, and I've worked here in the district for about 25 years and served as principal starting in 2007. So I've seen a lot. And I've heard repeatedly that the intent and goal of Scenario 3 is to keep cuts away from classrooms. There's a small group of principals that we accidentally got our budgets earlier than everybody else, and we got our one-pagers this morning. Everybody else is getting them tonight. And we had an opportunity to look at them and to understand what is happening with this new Scenario 3 budget. And I want to be clear with everybody that there are large cuts to school offices, to community schools, to wellness centers services, and to classroom services. And that is even true when we talk about our FTE at the continuation schools for teachers on a per pupil basis. So I am having fewer teachers per pupil next year than this year. So it is hitting in all fronts. So Scenario 3 hurts. And there's very few ways to cut $100 million or $50 million for it not to hurt. So I do expect that, but I want to be very clear and transparent about what is the decisions that we're making. So I've heard that there is an investment in continuation schools and moving them to S&C. And I think there's some disingenuousness about this, because that is changing the color of money, but not the investment in services and students. And so I want to be clear that the one-pagers that we received at continuation schools are actually walking back staffing and services, while we might be paying for them with a different kind of money. I don't know if that makes sense to you all. I hope so. If not, I'm happy to talk about it individually. And I do want to say that for more than 2 decades, even in the worst of the recession, we funded our continuation schools differently than our gen ed schools for particular reasons. Gen ed schools, their highest enrollment count is usually their 20th day. And then they have enrollment declines as kids drop out or move to continuation schools. The 20th day is actually usually the lowest enrollment for continuation schools. Students move to us after report cards and after semesters. And so we need the FTE of teachers so that when a student transfers from Oakland High and Fremont, we have a space and a teacher and a desk waiting for them. And for the first time ever, we are being funded with this new scenario budget based on our 20th day enrollment count. And even in the depths of the recession, we did not do that to continuation schools. And so I want to be clear that there is a walking back from some of our neediest students and concentrating them in schools without concentrating services for them. And I'm happy to talk about that at length and partner with the board, partner with Dr. Sadler, partner with the senior leadership team, but this needs to get addressed. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Next speaker.
Good evening, Board and Superintendent. Thank you so much. My name is Kerry Kaufman. I'm the President of the United Administrators for Oakland School. I want to appreciate all the work that is being done to make sure that we have accurate data. I am cautiously hopeful that the district is now projecting a deficit that is half of what was originally forecast. One question I do have, which is similar to what I heard from a community member, is are we using restricted funding to fund the base? And if so, what is the plan for if this money expires? However, like I said, I'm hoping to focus on some of the stuff we've heard today and moving forward. I am a little disappointed that there is no clarity today as to what will happen at the sites and the department level. As the superintendent mentioned today, $50 million is still a lot of money, and there will be cuts to staff. These are people. I'm speaking to express concerns that I am hearing from our members of not having clarity and answers around the budget. U.S. administrators are tasked with managing budgets at sites and centrally. This means they are responsible with informing these impacted staff members. However, many of our administrators have not seen their budgets. The conversations that need to be held are about whether or not employees will have jobs next year, whether or not they will get a paycheck, whether or not they will have health insurance. These are very emotional conversations. Our members are not even sure if they will have jobs next year. The lack of clarity has been a significant stressor on employees. We have had employees looking for employment elsewhere because they're unsure of job security, and we have already have staff leaving mid-year because of the impending cuts. People need to plan on how they will support their families and themselves, and the lack of clarity this late in the year is extremely stressful. Our site leaders are possibly receiving their one-pagers tonight or tomorrow, and there are significant concerns about how they will be able to run schools with staffing levels on their one-pagers. We are very concerned, and we just want to understand the budget and have a clear plan presented to us so we can support the implementation. Thank you.
Thank you. Next speaker, please.
Good evening, Carol Dalton. I represent the CAC on the outsourcing task force. For those who don't know me, although I was a parent, graduated parent now in OUSD, I spent my career in San Leandro Unified, our neighboring district, where I represented the teachers union on budget and finance issues. I want to say that over the past many months and maybe the last couple of years, I've heard a lot of strategies mentioned, but little follow through. Many good ideas, but little follow through. And even times when the board has passed budget adjustments and strategies, they haven't been operationalized. And I know that because some of them appeared in scenario 3, and I hope they'll be operationalized this year. Tonight, I really appreciated the tone. Like many others, I wished for more specifics. I think a tracker form, not a website, not a dashboard, a tracker form, simple, on paper, that shows you this is the budget adjustment, this is the progress with the date, the people responsible, is really needed by this community, like the audit committee tracker form, like the bond committee tracker form. Over the past, and I also think that a week from now, the community expects not to hear about the $50 million, but to hear about the $100 million. Not to hear about how you're going to get to second interim, but to hear about the plan that you have discussed to put in place, and I don't think that's impossible. Since no one else has mentioned concrete numbers before tonight, I will. I will just say that over the past 6 months, I had several frustrating conversations and dialogues by email with the former CBO. specifically about available money, the MA balance of approximately $26 million and the S&C carryover of approximately $30 million that can be used for many purposes, and I'm glad to see that the board is getting counsel that appropriately assesses the availability of those funds to take care of the district's needs. Thank you.
Thank you. We have speakers online.
Yes, we have Kim Ayers, Sheila Haynes, and Jonathan Mates.
Okay, 2 minutes each.
Ms. Ayers, if you can unmute yourself to speak.
Hi, good evening, board and senior leadership. I'm an OUSD parent in East Oakland. Tonight's update on the deficit reduction plan looks positive on paper, and I'm happy for that. However, it's hard to trust this late-breaking math because parents haven't forgotten the rush decisions that nearly eliminated after-school programs this year. My understanding is that no new money has been found. We are simply shuffling expenses to replenish reserves in one bucket. I have 3 concerns. First is our priorities. These repurposed supplemental and concentration funds are legally intended for high needs groups like foster youth, English learners, and low-income students. Please respect that. They are not a slush fund to maintain a status quo that is already failing our students. Second, I'm concerned about what the long-term fixes are. This shuffle provides breathing room, but we need a strategic multi-year plan with real data. Our outsized spending is ineffective. Only 1/3 of our students read at grade level, and only 40 out of 120 schools, both charter and district run, are showing improvement. This is not equitable. This is a disservice to all students to spread our limited resources so thin. Lastly, data and transparency. We still have half the deficit to close, and the second $50 million will be much harder, inevitably including layoffs. Next week's meeting is the last chance for public review before the February 11th vote on budget changes. When will actual line item adjustments be published? Please be the adults our kids need. Engage with experts and make the transparent, tough choices that put students' long-term futures over short-term political comfort. Thank you.
Thank you. Next speaker, please.
Next speaker is Ms. Haynes. If you can unmute yourself to speak. Ms. Haynes, can you hear us?
If there are no more speakers, we will move to a last round of board comments. Director Hutchinson.
Thank you. Uh, you know, I've been involved with OUSD budget issues and tracking the budget for over a dozen years now at this point. I've seen a lot of this before. In the end, I'm not really concerned what consultants are going to say after they were just hired a week and a half ago. I find it embarrassing and insulting that anyone would think that somebody coming in from the outside in a week and a half could possibly know more than what we know as a school board and know more about the work that all of us have supposedly been engaged in, some of us now for 5 years on the board. I'm really at a loss. And the fact that here we are at this point now on January 20th, there's no numbers, there's no plan. This board hasn't even begun to form a plan yet. And nobody seems to treat this with any sense of urgency. We went from Dr. Kyla Johnson-Trammell, who led us out of receivership, to now an interim superintendent who seems not to be willing to take full action. We went from Lisa Grant Dawson and Dan Bellino as Chief Business Officer and Chief of Staff to now Lynette McElhaney as Chief of Staff, who has no experience in OUSD or in a public school district at all, and outside consultants. And the one thing I liked about what the consultant said is he talked about for a long time the importance of having a chief business officer. Not only has Superintendent Sadler not presented a plan, which I've been asking her to do since October, to use her unilateral authority and do her job and present a plan. Not only has she not done that, but now she's forced out her chief business officer and has made no attempts to date to hire a new chief business officer. We're in a worse situation monthly. And for school board directors to sit up here now and tout, oh, now we know the deficit's only 50 million, I call BS. We all know that's not true. Director Brohard and Director Lotta sat with me in the Budget and Finance Committee meetings. We know the information that was presented to us. We know that that information was accurate. And we know that at no time did anyone question the accuracy of that information. We also know that we can't give a raise to any of our labor partners until we first address our budget deficit and then cut even more money if we're going to give them a raise. This ain't got to work. The clock is ticking, and we still have no plan for what we're going to do to pass a balanced budget. We deserve better, but the clock is ticking, and there's no way to ignore this deadline this time. Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, Director Lotta.
Yes, I just want to take a moment to just express, again, my appreciation for all the work that is happening. I know everybody has been working around the clock, but I want to just be clear about what I think I would need to see on January 28th and moving forward. While it's very reassuring that the deficit is smaller than 100 million, and I think that we obviously still have a structural gap to close and we have hard decisions ahead. And I do think that everybody can, the board, staff, the public can get behind a clear and honest plan rooted in our strategic plan that can move us out of crisis mode and toward a district that really prioritizes our students. So what I expect to see is, one, making it clear to the community why we're making difficult choices. Carm talked about the one-pagers. I think that seeing a one-pager that's not linked to a strategic plan or the initiatives that we have around teaching and learning does miss the point. So I'm asking that the team explicitly link our restructuring moves to the investments we're making in line with our strategic plan. It's just not enough to say that we're saving money. We have to show the public what we're investing in and what we're letting go and why. Whether that's our specialized literacy coaching to accelerate growth, staff compensation, expanded TK, or mental health supports. We just need to see also how a leaner central office and the savings therein directly translates into a more robust and joyful student experience. I also am requesting, in line with transparency, that the second interim and any reports moving forward, and I heard you mention this, Dr. Fructose, but include some, plain language, clear charts. I think Carol Delton's comment around on paper, line by line, a tracker of each line item that is in our restructuring plan is very important to show progress. And so, and again, we have, examples already in our committee work that have that. I also think I'd like to have some equity analysis as we make with these moves. People have mentioned that we are talking about our supplemental and concentration and some of our restricted dollars that are meant for our most vulnerable students. And as we move towards a more sustainable district, I also want to make sure we're increasing those supports and equity and quality. And our budget should reflect those moves. And I'll just say, as a parent of 3 kids in this district, and being on the board, I'm very committed to doing whatever I can to make this process transparent and fair and equitable and clear to the community so that we can all move towards long-term health. And for me, I'm ready to make those hard decisions as long as it's transparent, it's data informed, and tied to our strategic plan. Thanks.
Thank you, President Brohart. Just want to thank your team again for the report. I think what the report provided us is possibilities that, you know, how we're looking at our budget, there are other ways that we can actually see it. I think it also will start driving questions about where this board is really focusing their impact on the budget. With $100 million, everyone's going to be affected. With $50 million, we're all going to be affected still to this day. But I think what is starting to percolate up is the ability to talk to staff, talk to parents about the impact. I don't think we've really had that conversation yet. I think we needed to get an understanding of what our budget actually is and what is actually there. That's really been a crucial first step, is what is this budget representing? Because previous conversations really scared, fear, doubt, put a lot of that in people. And I think now we have actually a time to catch our breath and to really start to do some deeper dives into where these impacts, where these cuts can actually impact, or how we can actually keep the cuts away from the classroom. I think we all on this board want to keep them away from our class, away from our students as much as possible. And I truly believe that there's still money on the table that we haven't actually discovered just yet. So I look forward to us having those conversations moving forward. Look forward to next week when we actually have this conversation about what our budget looks like, looking at the data. I think we all want the same thing. What I ask of the superintendent is, can we get the information ahead of time and not at the last minute? I think that is something, as I go talk to constituents, talk to staff at school sites or in the community, I need to have the information ahead of time so I'll be able to reference something. I really want to have a town hall that we can continue to have this dialogue, but if we as board members don't get it ahead of time, I can't tell them what the plan is. I need to have that discussion with the superintendent, or we need to have that discussion about what the superintendent's vision is based on the budget that we're moving forward. Because we can talk about cuts, but we have to align what our vision is. And I know that literacy is our #1 scope. For me anyway, I will continue to push the literacy, and I want to see how these impacts are either investing in our students instead of taking away from our students. So I do want to thank you and your team for bringing the first step of conversation. Look for deeper engagement in the following weeks. Thank you.
Director Berry.
I like getting promoted academically. Nothing significant to add, because I just want to +1 a lot of the requests that Director Alada mentioned wanting to see next week. I think one thing I would add to elaborate on that is like it would be helpful to see the potential risk or consequences of implementing those tactics, not just to teaching and learning, but broadly. And Director Lada asked specifically to see the impact related to the strategic plan. I imagine that making such drastic cuts might compromise our ability to execute the strategic plan with integrity. And so where we might have to calibrate or make changes, I think it would be helpful to also see or hear the best or early thinking on that as well. I think that's it. I'll send you.
Vice President Batchelor?
Hasn't done yet, but okay. So I just want to start off with uplifting a phrase that I heard during public comment. We have to change the status quo. And I believe that's exactly what we are doing. By taking action to ensure that we didn't inadvertently go down a path that we have in the past, which is get a loan and into receivership, we certified qualified. We empowered the superintendent and the SLT to take a deep dive into the budget and be creative with our dollars while staying within the bounds of our legal obligations. We must continue down this path to see what we're able to come up with, because that's what our constituents want us to do. In order to continue to go down this path, I need the following things to be able to build on this amazing work. Clear, specific examples of how other districts use S&C funds first, then unrestricted funds. Again, this is a complete change of practice for us as a district, so getting some of those clear examples so that we know that we've been the outlier, and we can conform to a system that makes more sense and other districts use. A way to show how we went from 100 million as a deficit to a more realistic but still premature $50 million that was presented today. A clear way to account how much we are hoping to achieve by each adjustment, and a feedback loop that provides us with real-time information on those savings. I am tired of passing attachments A, B, and C and seeing how some of those adjustments weren't even made. Some of those ways in which we were thinking about making those adjustments, those hard decisions we made, never actually impacted the budget. We need that information to be able to continue with this path. And I would love some support for community engagement so that we can ensure community members can ask you all, the experts here today, some of the questions that they might have, and again, be able to inform our decisions for not only January 28th, but also February 11th. So I look forward to partnering with you all on doing some of this, and again, getting the support that I think each of us need to make sure that our constituents understand how we're moving down this path. Thank you.
In closing, tonight we heard from Superintendent Sadler and received a preliminary report from HYA, the fiscal experts who analyzed the OUSD budget. There are several important takeaways from tonight's presentation, but first I want to deeply appreciate the candor and clarity of Dr. Fruitos's presentation. First, we have the projected deficit is closer to 50 million. Second, the district has solid cash flow and sufficient cash on hand to avoid taking out a temporary loan to cover expenditures while awaiting the deposit of state funds. Third, we can maintain our required 3% reserve. And in addition, our first interim budget received a qualified certification. I want to directly, I'm not going to read that, sorry. The three takeaways from tonight, from Dr. Fruitos's presentation. One, our expenditures have to be in line with the revenues. Two, our attendance needs to be in line with our enrollment. And three, we need to move to spend down restricted money before unrestricted funds. I appreciate the information we received tonight, and this information is important to our collective understanding of our district finances. As we heard from the board, we look forward to seeing the plan for implementing Scenario 3. And I would like to ask the superintendent when we will see this plan so that the community and board will have time to review it. I think our community comments tonight were also very insightful and will help us in this budget development. As a board and as a district, we still have significant work ahead to develop a truly centered, sustainable budget. However, the information shared tonight gives us a stronger foundation for the decisions to come and the changes we must make in the future. Thank you again to the superintendent, the senior leadership team, Dr. Kirk Carter, and Dr. Futos for providing us a roadmap and a better understanding of our budget and the work ahead. I look forward to reviewing a detailed budget plan at our January 28th regular meeting, and thank you to everyone who participated this evening. Director Sadler, do you have any remarks?
I just wanted to thank our team, our leadership team. I want to thank the board for the excellent questions that will inform our continued work. And I want to thank the public for their insight and direction, which will assist us as we continue our ongoing meeting the challenges that are out here. I look forward to continued engagement and getting us to the end, which will be submitting a budget that can be approved. And that's the process, and that's the roadmap that we want to go down. So thank you very much.
Thank you. It's a little unusual. Someone did have their hand up.
Yes, we have Jonathan Mates and Sheila Haynes.
Okay, I think we're going to hear from both of them in the spirit of listening to our community. So,
Jonathan Mates, if you can unmute yourself to speak.
Thank you. I was just going to email you my comments, but I'm still here. President Brohard and board members and superintendent, my name is Jonathan Mates-Mushin. I appreciate the hopefulness of the presentations by President Brohard, Dr. Sadler, and HYA, and the work that's been done. I have 4 points that I see need to be addressed that I came up while listening tonight. I agree with Director Hutchinson's statement that it was a little disheartening that the district went to outside firm at the cost of over $400,000 when there's been so much effort to reduce consultant work, a whole task force and everything like that. And we have experts that either are or were in the district and in-house to do this work. Second, I don't want to cut schools or displace children or any of those things, but it's clear from my view and analysis of OUSD over the past few years that there are too few children for the number of schools that we have that we're trying to support. We can much better serve our community by right-sizing our district. The schedule that is proposed, or that was proposed by HYA, showed a part in May that there was going to be public comment on, but also said in that same time that all the decisions were going to already be made by May. So it's not clear how that is going to allow for public engagement. And then fourth, when you think about education broadly, if we focus on reductions on school supplies and services, how are students supposed to do chemistry without pipettes and beakers? It seems like students will lose with this scenario too. Thank you for your time.
thank you. Ms. Haynes?
Hi, can you hear me now?
Yes, we can hear you. I'm sorry.
Oh, okay, thank you. So I'm hoping that the deficit is actually what you say it is, because I still have concerns about additional funding cuts. I have a student in special education who's been learning online for 6 years now. And so if the deficit is only 50 million, I'm wondering, are you guys still going with the proposed scenario 3 cuts? Because if that's the case, that's nearly a fourth of the cuts having to come from special education. That just doesn't seem fair. While I have faith in Superintendent Sadler, I'm very happy and hopeful that we're also moving to a ban on hate speech. There has to be a way that so much money not be cut from special education. I do love the fact that the district has recommitted to a zero tolerance of hate speech, and I'm hoping that the board is also recommitting to not personally attacking each other anymore, because even at 50 million in cuts, our students have to still feel love and respect. With this update to the budget, though, I'm just asking that you please readjust the budget cuts, because if 12 million has to come from special education towards the 50 million, that will definitely cause more suffering than our students will endure. I'm really needing that reassurance that there will be some safe place with supports when my student finally goes back in person, because going online for 6 years, I mean, they're already getting the bare minimum of support. And I continue to be his only music teacher. I'm hoping there's a way you won't cut more funding in music and arts. And I hope that the finances will be under control with a sound budget so that our students will get all of what should be available to them. So thank you for the work that you have done. Please commit to the respect and fair treatment to all, and please reassess the cuts to special education. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Haynes. That we're adjourned. Thank you.